Chapter 1709. Yizichen didn't know where Gushwanda was, so he could only speak into the air. Since that was the case, the ancient race experts could naturally hear him as well. When they heard about the soul of the holy dragon, they were stunned. They'd never heard of a holy dragon's soul. Most of the people at the city gates were servants and juniors of the ancient race. The true old antiques wouldn't come to watch the show like the youngsters. They'd all been born in the past 10,000 years, so it was normal that they didn't know about the holy dragon. However, Blueprint frowned deeply. He felt like he'd heard of the holy dragon before, but all of a sudden, holy dragon. Blueprint's eyes suddenly widened. He had always respected Gushwanda, and it was an honor for him to be able to become Gushwanda's guard. In order to keep up with Gushwanda, Blueprint spent his free time reading secret tomes. One of the ancient records mentioned the holy dragon of the Dragon Clan, but after the great war of gods and demons, the Dragon Clan suffered a great loss, and no more holy dragons were born. Even golden dragons were very rare. As a result, the golden dragon became the symbol of the dragon race's highest status, and the holy dragon was gradually forgotten. Yet, Yizichen just said that the dragon soul on the signboard was the holy dragon's soul. Not only that, Yizichen even said that he'd take it. The holy dragon's soul was a treasure. How could he just take it? Clan head. Blueprint couldn't help but transmit with his divine sense. Before long, Gushwanda's reply appeared in his sea of consciousness. Tell him to take it. If he really has the ability, then so what if we give him the holy dragon's soul? Gushwanda snorted. Youngsters can be arrogant, but they have to know when to stop. Gushwanda was shocked by Yizichen's knowledge that he was able to see through the holy dragon's soul. However, trying to take away the dragon's soul of the holy dragon would be the biggest joke in the world. He silently watched the scene on the water screen. He really wanted to see how Yizichen would take the holy dragon's soul. Hey! Yizichen licked his lips, his eyes flashing with greed. This was the holy dragon's soul, an existence that had gone extinct in the ancient times. Holy dragons fed on the 5 elements. It was rumored that they could ignore all elemental attacks in their later stages. If I can take it. To be honest, Yizichen really wanted to thank the old dragon god. If it weren't for the dragon race's secret tome, Yizichen really wouldn't have recognized the holy dragon. Previously, he had comprehended the dragon race's secret manual and condensed the Azure Dragon image. All he lacked was a dragon soul to give it spirituality. Dragon souls were treasures in the Dragon Clan. It was impossible to get one from the Dragon Clan. Now that there was such a cheap dragon soul in front of him, how could he face himself if he didn't take it? So long as Yizichen could devour it and feed it with the 5 elements, it wasn't impossible for the tattered dragon soul to regain a sliver of consciousness. At that time, when he fought against the Outerium god race, there would be the devil Dharma body in front of him and the shadow of the sacred dragon at the back. Wouldn't the Outerium god race have a terrible headache? Yizichen rubbed his palms together, while his right hand continuously pinched the corner of his shirt. Azure Dragon appears. Suddenly Yizichen's gaze froze. With a deep roar, Yizichen's entire body radiated with golden light. The space behind him gradually distorted as a majestic Azure Dragon image appeared behind him. It had been a long time since he'd used the dragon race's secret tome, so he was somewhat rusty. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the Azure Dragon image behind Yizichen fully formed. Although it was only an image, it seemed more real than real. Whether it was its dragon patterns, scales, or whiskers, they all looked as if they'd been meticulously carved by a craftsman. Its bright, piercing eyes made it look like an emperor surveying his surroundings. His draconic might disdainfully overlooked all life. Roar! A resonant dragon's roar erupted from behind Yizichen, stirring up fierce gales that rippled through the air like ripples in water. The Dragon City experts couldn't help but shield their ears with divine power. They couldn't help but feel fear, and didn't dare meet the Azure Dragon's gaze. This draconic might. Outside the city gates, Lan Wen was astonished. He'd seen quite a few dragons, and he'd fought quite a few of them. However, in terms of draconic might, none of the dragon experts Lan Wen had encountered, not even the head of the dragon race, could compare to this azure dragon in the slightest. When the azure dragon appeared, the sacred dragon's soul fell silent. Just a moment ago, it had been roaring incessantly. Now, it curled up into a ball and whimpered. "The sacred dragon soul is afraid," shouted the ancient race expert. In response, Yi Zichen simply smiled indifferently. It was right to be afraid. The dragon race's secret scriptures had been passed down since ancient times. Not even the current Yao race had any records of them. If it weren't for the dragon god, the secret scriptures would have disappeared long ago. Although the current dragon race was a powerful race, they were still far inferior to the dragon race's golden age. Furthermore, Yi Zichen had received the dragon god's true inheritance. Although the dragon image behind him was the image of an azure dragon, even the dragon god had gasped in admiration. This azure dragon was clearly no ordinary dragon. Besides, in the primordial era, a true war dragon was an azure dragon. As soon as the azure dragon's image appeared, the sacred dragon soul was no longer as domineering as before. It whimpered, not daring to meet the azure dragon's gaze. In response, Yi Zichen simply smiled, then strode towards the city's signboard. When it sensed the azure dragon's draconic might approaching, the sacred dragon soul dove directly into the signboard and refused to come out. "Hide? You think you can hide?" As the ancient race experts watched, Yi Zichen clenched his fist and raised it high. The azure dragon behind him raised its right wing as well. As Yi Zichen's fist descended, the azure dragon's wings slammed into the signboard. Boom! Yi Zichen's right fist smashed into the signboard. This time, the sacred dragon soul didn't appear to resist in the face of the azure dragon's might. Without the blessing of the holy dragon, the wings of the blue dragon landed on the signboard with a loud crash. The signboard with the words, "Ancient City," written in gold inscribed on it suddenly had a crack. The crack grew wider and wider. Before long, the signboard shattered in half and fell to the ground. The ancient race experts were dumbfounded. Their city signboard, their pride, had been trampled on. Countless ancients' eyes went bloodshot. They wanted nothing more than to rush up and kill Yi Zichen, the bastard who'd broken their signboard. The blueprint instantly formed a barrier around them, trapping the Gu clansmen under the city gate. "Your Excellency, Blueprint. Without the clan head's orders, no one is allowed to touch him." As he said this, Blueprint's eyes were bloodshot. He was more upset than anyone else that the signboard had been broken, but as Gu Xuanda's bodyguard, he had to follow his orders. This Blueprint definitely isn't an emperor. Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes at the situation below. He could sense the barrier forming below. To be able to do this in the blink of an eye, there was no way he was an emperor. Chapter 1710. The city sign shattered. Countless Gu clan experts were furious. Gu Luolin covered her mouth in shock. She'd never imagined that her family's city sign would be smashed. However, there was also a hint of excitement in her shocked eyes. "So cool." She clenched her fists and couldn't help but mutter. The maids beside her immediately looked in her direction. "Miss, what did you just say?" "I didn't say anything." Gu Luolin giggled. In truth, it wasn't just the maids. Quite a few nearby experts heard her as well. However, they treated it as a hallucination. No matter what, Gu Luolin was a direct descendant of the Gu clan. How could she possibly say something like that after the city sign was broken? "That's so cool. My eldest nephew has done what I wanted to do but didn't dare to do in the past. He's really my eldest nephew." Gu Luolin couldn't help but nod inwardly as she looked at the broken city sign. At that moment, above the city gates, the divine dragon's soul was attached to the city sign. Now that the sign was broken, its residence was destroyed as well. It naturally appeared before Yi Zichen's eyes. When it sensed the dragons might approach, the divine dragon's soul cried out in pain and tried to retreat. Perhaps Gu Xuanda had placed it near the city sign to restrict it. Gu Xuanda had wanted to use the divine dragon's soul to scare Yi Zichen and restrict it to the city sign. That way the Gu clan would seem domineering. The divine dragon's soul guarding the gates was indeed domineering. However, Gu Xuanda never would have guessed that Yi Zichen would do something like that. He'd basically shot himself in the foot. Still want to run? Where do you think you're going at a time like this? When the city sign shattered, the pressure that had made it difficult for Yi Zichen to even move dissipated. Yi Zichen walked in front of the divine dragon's soul and gently reached out to touch it. The divine dragon's soul curled up in fright and didn't dare resist. It simply let Yi Zichen touch it and let out occasional cries of pain. What are you doing? You'll definitely have a much better future with me than guarding the gates. Sensing the divine dragon's fear, Yi Zichen retracted his hand. I believe that you must still have a trace of consciousness. Otherwise, you wouldn't have reacted in fear after sensing my dragon's might. Follow me and fuse with the azure dragon behind me. In the future, you can have as many elements as you like. What do you think? To his surprise, Yi Zichen didn't take a hard stance. Instead, he negotiated with the divine dragon's soul. During their discussion, Yi Zichen intentionally retracted his draconic might to make the holy dragon's soul feel better. You should be the remnant soul of the ancient holy dragon. You've fallen to this state because of the demon race and the god race. I won't deal with them. In the future, I'll definitely fight against the devil race and the god race. Come to me, and I'll avenge you. How about it? What kind of future does guarding the door have? Even if the Gu family's patriarch is a half-step transcendent expert, he is still just a half-step transcendent expert. I am this era's Emperor Star-Lord. In the future, I will be able to transcend. Not half-step, but directly transcend. Won't you have a better future following a transcending realm expert than a half-step transcending realm expert? The holy dragon's soul clearly had a sliver of consciousness. Yi Zichen was certain of that. Otherwise, when the azure dragon appeared behind Yi Zichen, it wouldn't have reacted in fear. Instead, it glared at him in a daze. In that case, it should be able to understand what Yi Zichen was saying, but it didn't react at all. Could it be that what he said wasn't to its liking? Maybe he should try another way? Yi Zichen muttered to himself for a moment, then glanced at the illusory azure dragon behind him. Although Yi Zichen had intentionally retracted his draconic might, the azure dragon's gaze alone was enough to deter the holy dragon's soul. The holy dragon was afraid of the illusory azure dragon. Could it? How about this? Follow me and I'll take you to the dragon god. Roar. The curled-up holy dragon's soul suddenly let out a roar. This roar wasn't like the previous ones, which were filled with hostility. Instead, it was tinged with excitement. Seeing this, Yi Zichen was delighted. It seemed the holy dragon used to follow the dragon god. The strand of consciousness it had left behind was directed at the dragon god. That was why Yi Zichen, who had been personally taught the dragon race's secret scriptures by the old dragon god, was so fearful. I'm excited about it. Brother, this phantom of mine is the secret manual of the dragon clan. You can feel it, right? The dragon's soul nodded like a human. Seeing this, Yi Zichen was overjoyed. Then you should also know that the dragon race's secret tome is in the hands of the dragon god. Since I was able to condense this azure dragon image, I naturally met the old dragon god before. I won't beat around the bush with you. Actually, this phantom of mine was personally taught to me by the old dragon god. I can be considered a disciple of the old dragon god. Roar, the holy dragon's soul roared again. It was clearly in draconic language. Yi Zichen meant. He didn't understand. However, he was sure that the divine dragon soul didn't have any objections to him. He had already mentioned the old dragon god. Furthermore, he was an inner disciple. If this holy dragon was the old dragon god's subordinate, he would definitely listen to him. I don't understand what you're saying. Although the old dragon god took me in, the old dragon god spoke to me in human language. You understand human language, right? It's the language I speak. I don't understand your dragon language, but I can promise you that as long as you follow me, I will definitely take you to see the old dragon god. What's more, I have a good relationship with you dragons. Your dragon princess is a golden dragon. That's my wife. Wife, do you understand what I mean? Roar, what the hell is he talking about? Yizichin couldn't help but mutter to himself. Since the holy dragon can't speak, it's really hard to communicate with him. However, the holy dragon soul's emotions seem to be friendly. Since that's the case, then there's nothing else to say. I'll just directly pull him in. Look, I have such a good relationship with you dragons. The dragon princess is my wife, and your old dragon god is my master. What are you waiting for? Follow me. Stop guarding the door. Dragons have their own pride. Guarding the door is something a dog should do. Achoo! Lil White rubbed his nose. Who's missing me? How about it? Are you following me or not? With that, Yizichin did not say anything else. He merely stared at the holy dragon's soul. He was the great hoodwinker. He had said everything he could. The holy dragon's soul hesitated for a moment. Roar, it let out another loud roar, then snuck back into Yizichin's sleeves. Not long later, the mirage of the dragon behind Yizichin seemed to solidify. A hint of intelligence appeared in its eyes as it flapped its wings and roared. Hey, Yizichin couldn't help but feel excited with the addition of the holy dragon's soul. Bro, rest well. I can't maintain the mirage of the holy dragon for long. I'll take you to see the old dragon god in a few days. Roar, the holy dragon roared. Yizichin smiled, then retracted the dragon. Chapter 17:11. Within the tower. Yizichin's arrogant laughter rang out from within the water screen, but when Yirong heard it, her heart skipped a beat. Gu Xuanda didn't show any of his emotions on his face. He simply waved his hand and dispersed the water screen. Clan uncle. Yirong was rather worried for him. The divine dragon was a precious item, but he'd taken it away. That wasn't too bad, she could just have Yizichin return it. The most important thing was the city sign. The sign was the pride of the Gu clan, yet Yizichin had destroyed it. This infuriated the experts of the Gu clan even more. Yizichin, this child, is too impudent. Yirong cursed in a testing manner. Hearing that, Qingli patted Yirong's hand. You can't blame him. Xuanda already said that it's his ability to destroy the sign, and it's also his ability to take the divine dragon away. Since he did it with his own ability, why blame him? Lil Rong, you really gave birth to a child, unlike that girl of mine. She's still like a child. Auntie. Alright, don't worry. Xuanda isn't a petty person. He's the head of the Gu clan, he's a man of his word. He definitely won't blame Yizichin, and will even reward him, Qingli smiled, then looked towards Gu Xuanda. Right, Xuanda? Yes. Reward him handsomely. Gu Xuanda nodded benevolently. Qingli had already burst into laughter. She'd known Gu Xuanda for so long, but she'd never seen him suffer so much. The city sign was destroyed, and the divine dragon's soul that he'd obtained with great difficulty was stolen. She knew the origins of the divine dragon's soul. Gu Xuanda had indeed obtained it in the ancient battlefield, but it wasn't as easy as he'd said. In order to condense such a soul, Gu Xuanda stayed in the ancient battlefield for 100 years. He condensed the remnant souls bit by bit, and only then did such a holy dragon's soul appear. He'd treated the divine dragon's soul like a treasure, and had only recently placed it on the city sign. He'd wanted to use the divine dragon's soul to scare Yizichin because he knew he was proficient in the Tao of the 5 elements. Who would have thought? See, since Xuanda said so, don't worry. Instead of comforting Gu Xuanda, Qingli looked at Yirong with a smile. Yirong couldn't help but be confused by the scene in front of her. She felt that the problem wasn't that simple. However, these two were half-step transcendence realm experts and were her seniors. She didn't think too much about it. All he could do was nod repeatedly, praise Gu Xuanda's kindness, and thank him on Yi Zichen's behalf. There was no response from Gu Xuanda. Yi Zichen really wanted to hear Gu Xuanda's exasperated curses. Being able to infuriate a half-step transcendent level cultivator was pretty cool. Unfortunately, Gu Xuanda did not respond. Yi Zichen could only twitch his mouth in disappointment, then land beside Blueprint. Blueprint Guard, please lead the way. Yi Zichen didn't forget his purpose in coming here. The Gu clan head wanted to see him. Breaking the city plaque and seizing the Holy Soul was just a small interlude in entering the city. Now that the city plaque no longer exerted any pressure on him, he naturally wanted to enter the city to see the half-step transcending realm expert who had suffered a great loss. However, as soon as he landed, Yi Zichen felt countless powerful auras lock onto him. Yi Zichen's heart skipped a beat. Even the weakest of these auras were emperors, and there were quite a few monarchs among them. This Gu clan, with 3 half-step transcendence realm experts, Yi Zichen couldn't underestimate them. However, everyone from his clansmen to his attendants were all emperor-level experts. This was way too terrifying. Yi Zichen looked around and saw that practically everyone at the city gates was staring at him. It seemed they were all furious that Yi Zichen had broken their city plaque. Yi Zichen, who'd just been joking with the Gu clan head, gulped despite himself. Gu Xuanda was his senior. Yi Zichen trusted that he wouldn't bicker with a junior like him. However, the Gu clan experts before him might not be as magnanimous as Gu Xuanda. There were so many emperors and monarchs. If they really attacked, Yi Zichen wouldn't be able to survive even if he had 10 lives. Brat, you dared to break Gu Xuanda's city plaque. Suddenly, a burly man appeared at the city gates. He clenched his fists and charged at Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen instinctively activated the power of the 5 elements, but Blueprint acted first. With a wave of his hand, he slapped the Imperial Emperor back. Alliance Head Yi is the clan head's honored guest. How dare you? Lord Blueprint. The burly man who was pushed back clutched his chest and roared with unwillingness in his heart. He broke our city gate's signboard and said those words, disrespecting our clan leader. The clan head didn't hold it against you. You don't need to win face for the Gu clan. Blueprint narrowed his eyes and looked around angrily. Just now, I took pity on you all for protecting the clan. If anyone dares to disrespect Alliance Head Yi in the slightest, don't blame me for being merciless. It was obvious that Blueprint held great prestige within the Gu clan. Or perhaps it was more accurate to say that his cultivation was enough to crush everyone at the city gate. As soon as he said that, the people who'd previously held a grudge against Yi Zichen couldn't help but lower their heads. However, there were still quite a few among them who didn't avert their gazes and snorted angrily. Lord Blueprint, breaking the Gu clan city gates is a slap in the face. No one has ever dared provoke us like this in tens of thousands of years. Since he's the clan head's honored guest, he should treat the Gu clan with even more respect. He shouldn't have broken our city plaque and insulted the clan head. I didn't receive the clan head's transmission. I don't know if Lord Blueprint's words are true or not, but here. This person who broke our city gate plaque must pay for his mistake with his blood. Ha, are you saying you want to try me? Suddenly, Blueprint's body glowed with a deep blue light. Countless cyclones rose from beneath his feet, and a heavy, mountainous pressure enveloped everyone's hearts. Quite a few emperors retreated 10,000 meters. They didn't dare stay under the Emperor's pressure for long. That's exactly what I was thinking. The person who'd spoken earlier snorted and stepped forward. Perfect timing. I want to see if Lord Blueprint really has the right to be the clan head's personal guard. Lord Baisho, he's here too. When they saw who'd stepped forward, the crowd grew restless. Last time, Lord Baisho lost to Lord Blueprint in a martial arts duel. He never became the clan head's personal guard. It seems he's always been dissatisfied, so he's purposefully causing trouble for Lord Blueprint. Lord Baishou's been in the ancient battlefield all these years. I wonder if Lord Blueprint is his match. Humph, I support Lord Baishou. That brat really went too far. He should be taught a lesson. Yi Zichen couldn't help but be stunned when he saw Blueprint and Baishou clashing head-on. What's going on? Chapter 1712. The lights flickered alternately. Blueprint's body was emitting a deep blue brilliance while Baishou, who was standing opposite him, was emitting a blood-red light. The alternating brilliance of these two colors was dazzling to behold. Emperor! When they truly released their auras, Yi Zichen sensed their cultivations. They were all in the Emperor realm. In the outside world, an Emperor realm expert was already an Emperor of a realm. In the God, Yao, and Demon races, only the God Emperor, the Demon Emperor, and the Fey Emperor had reached this realm. In the ancient race, they hadn't even entered the city, but they had already seen them. Of course, this was also because Yi Zichen had broken the city sign. Quite a few experts had come to watch. Even so, the appearance of two emperors was still somewhat shocking. The ancient race was indeed worthy of their name. Sigh, those two are fighting again. Gu Luolin shook her head with a sigh. While the two of them were at loggerheads, Gu Luolin spread her wings and brought Yi Zichen to a safe location. She shook her head and sighed as she looked at the blueprint and the fact that she couldn't keep it. Do they fight often? That's right. As long as Baishou returns from outside, he will definitely find Blueprint for a fight. These two actually don't have any grudges, they just want to be my father's bodyguards. Tell me, what's so good about being my bodyguard? He's always pulling a long face, as if someone owes him money, Gu Luolin muttered. But the two of them remind me of an anime. Anime? Gu Luolin blinked. Dragon Ball Super? Yi Zichen's gaze instantly tensed up as he looked at Gu Luolin speechlessly. Anime and manga were products of the modern world and did not exist in this upper plane. How did she know about Dragon Ball Super? All of a sudden, Yi Zichen recalled that the ancient texts Gu Luolin had mentioned were actually wuxia novels. What? Did I say something wrong? Gu Luolin pointed at the blueprint and Baishou. Aren't these two super science key explosion? 100 guards exploded with pink key, and blueprint exploded with blue key. According to Dragon Ball Super's explosive level, Blueprint has lost. What a ghost! This was clearly a creation of the modern realm. How did Gu Luolin know so much about it? The Aboriginals not only read wuxia and fantasy novels, but they also watched cartoons. Where did you learn all this? Asked Yi Zichen. I already have them at home. When I was young, I liked to see them. It's just that when I grew up, my father wouldn't let me see them. Gu Luolin said with some regret on her face. When I was young, my father accompanied me to watch it every day. He always told me that in the future, he would be like a super scion and smash a planet with one punch. At that time it's good to serve Daddy. When I grow up, I know that Daddy always keeps a straight face and doesn't say anything. Did your father ever say how these came about? I heard that he recorded it when he was traveling in outer space. I recorded it. Yi Zichen's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets, and his mouth opened so wide that an egg could fit inside. What did Gu Luolin say? Recorded. Dragon Ball Super was recorded by Gu Xuanda when he was traveling in outer space. Gu Luolin nodded and said, My father said that he couldn't beat those people at that time. However, my father was good at hiding, so he hid beside them and recorded it. When he came back, he studied it himself and figured out how to beat them. Stop joking. Yi Zichen's expression froze to the point of no return. Dragon Ball Super was clearly an extension of Dragon Ball. An anime was just an anime. Why did Gu Luolin, or perhaps Gu Xuanda, make it sound like a recording? It was real? One Kaioken could shatter a planet. One Kamehameha could destroy several planets. How could this be real? If people like that really existed, Wouldn't they be annihilated in the blink of an eye if they wanted to attack the Milky Way? Suddenly, Yi Zichen thought of the supreme treasure and fairy Zixia. In the modern realm, Journey to the West was nothing more than a moving, emotional movie. Countless people wept over it. But after spending some time with the great sage, Yi Zichen realized that fairy Zixia was real, and so was the supreme treasure. Their story was even more real. Was it possible that Dragon Ball Super? Impossible. As soon as this thought popped into his head, Yi Zichen suppressed it. He still hadn't figured out what the outsiders were up to. If people from Dragon Ball Super really existed, then what was the point of playing around? In a battle between experts, accumulating power was extremely important. Blueprint and Bai Shou exploded in front of the city gates for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. They looked at each other, but neither made a rash move. I heard you gained a lot from the ancient battlefield. Blueprint's hair stood on end, and the air around him swirled wildly. He smiled at Bai Shou. I gained a lot, snorted Bai Shou. You say that every time, but in the end, you're still no match for me. Don't you get tired of being like this? In truth, you're already very strong, said Blueprint. If I can't defeat you, how can I be considered strong? Then make your move. Let me see just how much you've improved lately. As soon as Blueprint said that, Bai Shou, who was covered in pink energy, stomped the ground. The ground beneath his feet caved in, and a storm of dust rose up, making it impossible to see what was going on inside. The people standing in the air could only see the blue and pink chi constantly changing positions. Through the spatial collisions between the two, they could tell what was going on. It really is a bit like Dragon Ball Super. Yi Zichen stood in the sky and looked down. This sort of high-frequency fight was extremely similar to the fights in Dragon Ball Super. They fought from the south to the north, then from the north to the west. The explosive Blueprint and 100 guards kept colliding back and forth. Because the two of them were fighting so fast, no one knew to what extent they were fighting. Boom! With another loud sound, Blueprint and Bai Shou separated. Both of them were more or less injured, but upon closer inspection, Bai Shou's injuries were more serious. It seems like I can't hide my trump card anymore. Bai Shou wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and squinted his eyes. This is a battle technique I comprehended in the ancient battlefield. If you can block it, then I won't cause trouble for you for the rest of my life. Please don't be stingy with your teachings. Blueprint reached out his hand with a smile, looking rather chivalrous. Bai Shou bent down slightly and placed his hands on his stomach. F***CK, Kamehameha Qigong. Yi Zichen couldn't help but shout. Bai Shou, who was accumulating energy, turned around and glanced at Yi Zichen. Young hero, you have good eyesight. As expected of the clan head's esteemed guest. F***CK, it really is. But didn't I comprehend this Kamehameha Qigong myself? I'm not curious why Yi Zichen could call out the name of the technique I comprehended. Chapter 17:13. The more I look at him, the more he looks like him. Bai Shou stood in the air with his hands on his abdomen and bent over. Sure enough, a pure white ball of light appeared where his palms met. The ancient race truly was a place full of surprises. Everyone in the race was an emperor-level expert. Even rulers didn't have much of an influence here. The holy dragon soul, which hadn't been seen for tens of millions of years, had also appeared. Now 2 more super scions with explosive energy had arrived. Among them, the one with explosive energy could use Kamehameha. Yi Zichen was waiting for Bai Shou to use Kamehameha. He wanted to see if his Kamehameha was as fierce as Wukong's. Blueprint also sensed the threat of Kamehameha. The blue energy around him grew even more violent. If you can use World King Fist on me, then I'll submit to the ancient race, Yi Zichen muttered to himself. Since it had already happened, and the Kamehameha that shouldn't have appeared, Yi Zichen decided to just accept it and continue to watch in anticipation. Stop! An imposing voice suddenly sounded out from within the city. If Yi Zichen wasn't mistaken, It was the ancient race's head, Gu Xuanda. Bai Shou instantly dispersed the Kamehameha in his hands. The two of them also withdrew their Super Saiyan energy back into their bodies. Blueprint, bring people to the tower. Understood. Blueprint cupped his fist and bowed towards the city, then instantly appeared in front of Yi Zichen and made an inviting gesture. The clan head invites you in. Yi Zichen couldn't help but feel that it was a pity that he didn't get to see Kamehameha. Yi Zichen pursed his lips, then glanced at Bai Shou. Bro, I feel like if you use it, then you'll probably win. Young hero, you truly have good eyes. If you let me go all out, then given Blueprint's level, it'll be very difficult for him to defend against my attack. Bai Shou beamed with joy at Yi Zichen's praise. Humph, if you don't accept it, then we'll fight again. Blueprint snorted coldly, then looked at Yi Zichen with a gaze that was no longer as friendly as before. Blueprint and Bai Shou were old rivals. He admitted that Bai Shou's Kamehameha was a bit of a threat, but he was rather displeased that someone said he couldn't beat guard. Hey, if you know Kaioken, I'll bet on you winning. Yi Zichen chuckled, while confusion flashed across Lan Jianba's eyes. It seems like he doesn't know about the existence of Realm King Fist. When Yi Zichen noticed the change in his gaze, he let out a disappointed sigh. He had thought that he would be able to watch a world war between Dragon Ball Super in the Aboriginals, but this blueprint was really disappointing. He did not even know how to use Kaioken. Under the guidance of the blueprint, Yi Zichen and Gu Luolin entered the city. As he entered the city, Yi Zichen sensed quite a few ancient clansmen's resentment towards him. From time to time, their auras would sweep past him, suppressing him somewhat. Blueprint saw all of this, but did not stop them. If it wasn't for the fact that the clan head forbade him from harming Yi Zichen, he would have been the first to fight Yi Zichen. This little fellow is really troublesome. Gu Xuanda, who had chased away the blueprint and the 100 guards, pursed his lips and smiled. His expression was like that of a senior looking at a naughty junior. However, Qingli, who was familiar with Yi Zichen, knew that her husband was furious. It seemed like she had to pay more attention to Yi Zichen and Gu Xuanda. If her husband was truly angry, she could warn him in advance in case he really hurt Yi Zichen. How imposing! The ancient city was filled with row upon row of skyscrapers. When Yi Zichen entered, he actually had the illusion that he was in a metropolis of the modern realm. The skyscrapers reached into the clouds, the streets were smooth, and there was even vegetation on both sides of the street. If there were more cars on the streets, it really would look like a small town. Alliance head Yi, this way please. Lan Jianba gestured for Yi Zichen to follow. What appeared in front of him was a towering tower that pierced the clouds. Yi Zichen had noticed it even before entering the city. When he was breaking the city plaque, he had noticed this tower. The tower was truly tall. Yi Zichen hadn't even been able to see its end when he stepped into the sky. Could it be that he had to walk up to such a tall tower? The answer was naturally no. What's more, the means of transportation they were on drove Yi Zichen mad. An elevator. There was actually an elevator here. Gu Luolin, did you have this since you were born? Yi Zichen couldn't help but ask after they entered the elevator. To be honest, Yi Zichen felt that his mental fortitude was pretty strong. However, after arriving at the ancient race, he was constantly being bombarded. In order to solve his problems, Gu Luolin and his teacher desperately answered all sorts of questions for him. Yeah, it's always been here. You've never seen it before, right? It's called an elevator, Gu Luolin said proudly. My father extracted the power of lightning from the heavens and connected it to the elevator, turning it into a perpetual state of motion. F***ck, they even called it the same thing. Extracting the power of lightning from the heavens really was something. These clearly belonged to the modern realm, yet they had all appeared in the ancient race. Outside, there were rows upon rows of skyscrapers. Gu Luolin had read anime and wuxia fantasy novels. This place was practically half the modern realm. It was just like the first era in the outside, it was exactly the same as the modern realm. Yi Zichen truly had the urge to grab Gu Xuanda by the neck when he saw him and ask him why something from the modern realm had appeared here. Was it because he had gone to the modern realm in advance? Or perhaps it was more accurate to say that the modern realm had already been unfrozen. He had gone to the modern realm to steal this technology. The former was fine, but if it was the latter, the modern realm had already been unfrozen. Even if he went back now, would it still be the same world as before? Ding dong. The elevator doors opened. Blue Blueprint continued to lead the way. After passing through several corridors, they arrived at a vast platform shrouded in mist. Yi Zichen saw 3 figures with their backs to him. Clan head, Alliance head Yi is here. Go down. That was the voice. The person who spoke was the one Yi Zichen had spoken with earlier. Yi Zichen locked his gaze on the figure with his back to him, then walked forward slowly, rolling up his sleeves. He was going all out. Even if Gu Xuanda was half-step away from transcending, he had to get to the bottom of this. Just as he was about to reach out and grab Gu Xuanda's neck, Zichen, don't be rude. A familiar, gentle, yet slightly stern voice sounded out beside Yi Zichen's ear. When he turned around, he saw Yi Rong looking at him angrily. Chapter 17:14. Yi Zichen was the ruler of several sacred lands of the God and Yao realms and had millions of troops under his command. The only person he feared in this world was his mother, Yi Rong, who stood before him. Back in the God Emperor's tomb, Gu Luolin had mentioned her relationship with Yi Rong. At the time, Yi Zichen hadn't completely disbelieved her. He knew full well that his surname was Gu, and since he'd met Gu Zichen, he knew a bit about what had happened in Gu Zichen's realm. However, the difference between the modern realm's Gu family and the God realm's Gu family was simply too vast. It was hard to connect the two together. Now, Yi Rong had appeared in the Gu family. It seemed she'd confirmed the fact that he was a member of the Gu family. Big sister Yi Rong. Gu Luolin giggled as she ran to Yi Rong's side. From the looks of it, her relationship with Yi Rong was very close, perhaps even more than that of her parents. Luolin's here too. Gu Luolin gently patted her on the head, then nodded and smiled. Can't you see that your mother and father are here too? On the platform of the high tower, a low voice that was not particularly gentle could be heard. The smile on Gu Luolin's face, who had been smiling just a moment ago, suddenly disappeared. There was some nervousness and fear in her eyes as she looked over. Dad, Mom. Humph, you left the family subdimension without my permission and risked your life to go to the God Emperor's tomb. You even risked your life to enter the God Emperor's tomb. I really don't know if you still see me as your father. Gu Xuanda's tone grew harsher and harsher. He'd been in a high position for so long, his body involuntarily emanated an oppressive aura. The temperature on the platform plummeted and the air pressure rose. Gu Luolin, who stood behind him, could only hang her head. She was no longer as lively and playful as before. Instead, she bit her lip in fear. I know I was wrong. All right. Luolin just got tired of staying in the clan and wanted to go out and see. Why did she have to be so angry? A gentle whisper and a blurry shadow appeared in the clouds. From the figure, Gu Xuanda could see her bend down and gently rub Gu Luolin's face. Then, her gentle voice rang out from the platform once more. It's good that Luolin's back safely. Next time you go out, you have to tell Mom or I'll be really worried. It's good that you're fine. Go back to your room and play by yourself. Mom and I have some business to discuss with your big sister Rong and her son, Yi Zichen. Gu Luolin didn't want to stay a second longer. Her father always had a dark expression on his face when he saw her. She felt uncomfortable standing with him. Since Qingli had asked her to leave, she would definitely not stay any longer. After taking a few steps towards the gate of the tower, Gulin suddenly stopped. Mother, I have something to do, can we talk about it after I'm done? Qingli smiled warmly. Gu Luolin nodded, then disappeared into the clouds. Gu Xuanda, who was still sitting with his back towards Yi Zichen, couldn't help but snort coldly. Yi Zichen squinted at his surroundings, then saw a woman walk out of the clouds. The woman was wearing a green silk dress, and from her appearance, she looked to be around 20 years old. Yi Zichen couldn't help but be stunned the moment he laid eyes on her. Yi Zichen had seen his fair share of breathtakingly beautiful women. Zhuo Mo, Xia Kiki, and Su Yan were all devastatingly beautiful. However, the woman in front of him was different. It was as if she had walked out of a painting. Her every movement seemed to exude the aura of a fairy. Her skin was smooth, her eyebrows were seductive, and her long, black hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall. Anyone who saw her would feel their heart skip a beat. However, her seductive eyes also contained a coldness that no one dared to look directly at. "You must be Lil Rong's child," Gu Luolin smiled. Yi Zichen felt very uncomfortable being called a child by such a young and beautiful woman, and her calling his mother Lil Rong. However, even if he felt uncomfortable, he didn't dare to act rashly, because he knew very well that, if there were no surprises, then the woman in front of him was one of the 3 half-step transcendence experts of the Gu race, and also Gu Luolin's mother, Qingli. Junior Yi Zichen greets Senior. Ha! Qingli covered her mouth and laughed. That laugh caused the sun and moon to change color, and the flowers to droop. "You're rather interesting, you actually called me Senior. Your mother is standing here. She's a member of the Gu family. If we're going by seniority, shouldn't you be calling me Grandma?" Yi Zichen's expression darkened. Is there something wrong with this family? Why did they suddenly start talking about seniority? Even when Gu Luolin was around, she'd always emphasized her status as a senior. Qingli did the same. What was even worse was that she wanted him to call her Grandma. Although Yi Zichen knew that Qingli might be tens of thousands of years old, she really did look like she was in her early 20s. However, she only looked like she was in her early 20s. Yi Zichen really couldn't bring himself to call someone like that Grandma. Even if Lil Rong is a member of the Gu race, that doesn't mean he has the right to enter. What right does he have to call us relatives? Suddenly, Gu Xuanda snorted from within the clouds. Soon after, a middle-aged man with bright eyes and a face as sharp as a knife walked out from the clouds on the platform. He wore a purple robe, and his gait was as majestic as a dragon's or a tiger's. As he walked over, the surrounding clouds instinctively parted for him. He walked directly in front of Yi Zichen and looked down at him condescendingly. He hated that look. What Yi Zichen hated the most was when people looked at him like that. It was as if he thought he was awesome and disdained everyone else, as if they were ants. Yi Zichen couldn't indulge this sort of person. Without even thinking about it, he glared at him. "You're Yi Zichen? That's an interesting question. Didn't you already see me when we were outside the city? What's the point of asking again? When the time comes, you made me the #1 person in all of history, and you even gave me such a generous gift as the Holy Dragon Divine Soul. I must thank you." With that, Yi Zichen bowed slightly to Gu Xuanda to express his gratitude. Gu Xuanda's expression stiffened despite himself. This kid really dared to say such things. If not for his status as a senior, Gu Xuanda really would have slapped Yi Zichen to death. But Yi Rong was here, so he couldn't argue with Yi Zichen. He forced down his anger and smiled. "Breaking the city's signboard is your ability, and obtaining the Dragon Soul is your fate. This only proves that your luck and strength are first-rate. You fought for it yourself, so there's no need to thank me." "Oh, I know that, but my mom's here, so I have to be polite. I have to be polite." When Gu Xuanda heard that, his expression stiffened. Qingli had long since suppressed her laughter. She looked at Yi Zichen and nodded repeatedly. Before coming here, Yi Zichen had wanted to see Gu Xuanda suffer. Now that he'd fulfilled his wish, and Gu Xuanda was still a half-step transcendent expert, Yi Zichen didn't dare act rashly. Chapter 17-15. How many years had it been? Ever since Gu Xuanda became the head of the Gu family, no one had ever dared speak to him like that. Qingli was his wife, and he really did spoil her. That was why she'd run her mouth off when they were alone. However, even she would be considerate and comfort Gu Xuanda when he was in a bad mood. The others didn't even need to be mentioned. Never mind glaring at him to anger him, they didn't even dare breathe loudly in his presence. It had been a long time since Gu Xuanda had seen someone who did not know etiquette, had no sense of propriety, and did not know when to back off. Zichen, how can you speak to the head like that? Apologize. Yirong shouted. This was the head of the Gu family. With a single stomp of his foot, he could destroy all three races. Even though Yi Zichen had grown up quickly, he couldn't compare to Gu Xuanda at all. In Yirong's memories, Yi Zichen had always been a well-mannered child. How come now? Could it be that he'd really become arrogant after holding a high position for so long? No matter what, Yirong couldn't let Yi Zichen continue making mistakes like this. If she really angered Gu Xuanda, never mind Yi Zichen's current upheaval alliance, even 10 of them would be nothing more than a snap of his fingers. The more she thought about it, the more agitated Yirong became. Hurry up and apologize. Yirong walked up to Yi Zichen's back and smacked him hard. Before Yi Zichen could react, Gu Xuanda laughed. It's fine. I heard your son has quite the status in the God realm. For a young man to have accomplished so much at such a young age, it's inevitable that he'll pick up some bad habit. I won't lower myself to his level. Then you're amazing. Yi Zichen grinned and gave him a thumbs up. However, why did his tone sound like mockery? Really, Gu Xuanda couldn't hold back any longer. He tried to keep his cool several times to avoid bickering with Yi Zichen, but the kid just kept provoking him. Strangely enough, if anyone else had provoked him like this, Gu Xuanda wouldn't have cared. No giant would care about an ant's provocation. Gu Xuanda could be considered a giant of this era. Others, even emperors, were still ants in his eyes. At most, they were just a bit bigger. They weren't on the same level at all. Provoking him was nothing more than a joke. However, Yi Zichen was an ant among ants to Gu Xuanda. Gu Xuanda was furious. His entire body trembled uncontrollably, and he felt the urge to strangle Yi Zichen. The Gu Xuanda wanted to strangle him. Gu Xuanda was already merciful enough that he didn't directly kill Yi Zichen. How could he possibly respond to Yi Zichen's words? After mocking him, Yi Zichen didn't look like he had any intention of continuing. For a moment, the Gu Xuanda the same. Little fellow, you're going a little too far. No matter what, Xuanda is still your senior. Even if you're not a member of the ancient clan, he's still your senior with his realm. How can you talk to him like that? Of course, Qingli wasn't actually blaming Yi Zichen. Rather, it was more of a rebuke. Xuanda, she said, Yi Qing, she, Yi, Gu Qing. You're right, senior. It's my fault for not respecting etiquette. Junior should always remember, even if senior does not act like a senior, junior should still abide by the rules and etiquette. Just now it was my fault. Please punish me. Yi Zichen bowed deeply, then looked up, his gaze sincere. But I really didn't mean to offend you. I was just curious as to why you'd summon me here. You know that I work for the Upheaval Alliance. The timing of the Third Era is a bit ambiguous. We don't know when the outsiders will attack. As the Lord of the Stars, I have the right and responsibility to ensure the safety of the Third Era. Naturally, I have a lot of internal affairs that require my personal attention. I also want to listen to your teachings as soon as possible so I can go back and deal with internal affairs. I'm running around for the greater good. What a sharp tongue. Gu Xuanda's expression darkened, but he snorted inwardly. How could he not understand what Yi Zichen was trying to say? What he was trying to say was, "Don't touch me. I'm the Third Era's Emperor Star. My life is precious." Furthermore, his rudeness was only because he cared about the world. His emotions fluctuated a bit, and his words were a bit rash. If you make an enemy of me, that means you can't tolerate the world. That means you're going against the entire Third Era. Become enemies. Gu Xuanda knew full well that Yi Zichen's words were directed at him. As for why, when Yi Zichen said all this, his eyes were fixed on Gu Xuanda. Qingli didn't think as deeply as Gu Xuanda. She'd only said that to lighten the mood and give her husband a way out of this embarrassing situation. We know you're busy, but we're here for something important as well. More important than the world. When Yi Zichen said that, Qingli wanted to nod. In truth, she and Gu Xuanda had called Yi Zichen over for news of the outsiders. She didn't dare say she was more important than the world, but at the very least, she was doing it for the good of the world. However, young fella, don't always talk about the people in the world. Those who truly care about the people in the world won't talk about it like you do every day. Instead, they'll do it with real actions, Gu Xuanda said. You know that too? You're amazing, said Yi Zichen in a tone that made Gu Xuanda gnash his teeth in anger. However, before long Yi Zichen's expression changed. Then, why exactly did you call me here? I'm really busy. Not bad, kid. You're so arrogant and despotic even after coming to the Ancients. Busy? If the Ancients wanted to see him, no matter who they were, even if they had important business on their hands, they'd have to drop everything and rush over to see him. I have to teach this kid a lesson, Gu Xuanda thought viciously to himself. His anger had gotten the better of him, and he couldn't be bothered to follow through on the plan he'd discussed with Qingli. Since you're busy, I won't say anything more. That would be for the best, interrupted Yi Zichen. Gu Xuanda instantly felt his blood boil. He gnashed his teeth, his gaze deep. I wanted to ask you if you'd like to return to the Ancients. Do you want to take on the surname Gu? When Qingli heard that, she stared at Gu Xuanda in shock. That wasn't what they'd discussed. However, she somewhat understood. Her husband was truly furious. Otherwise, he wouldn't be acting like this. Return to the Ancients? Yi Rong was stunned as well. Then a hint of anticipation flashed through her eyes as she looked at Yi Zichen. She'd always wanted Yi Zichen to join the Ancients. So long as he joined, he'd be a direct descendant of the Ancients. Then, he'd be able to rely on the Ancients' power to fend off their enemies. Unfortunately, she'd never found a suitable opportunity to bring it up with Yi Zichen. This time, Gu Xuanda brought it up of his own accord. From his tone, it seemed like he was offering an olive branch. So long as Yi Zichen nodded, Yi Rong was sure he'd be able to smoothly join the Ancients. As for the conflict between Gu Xuanda and Yi Zichen, she could ask Qingli indirectly to mediate. The most important thing right now was to agree to this. Yi Rong trusted that Yi Zichen was an understanding person. The Gu family was a colossal entity. If he could borrow their help. Chapter 17:16. Yi Zichen rejected her without the slightest hesitation. As soon as he said that, the atmosphere on the tower's platform underwent a complete change. Out of nowhere, a gust of cold wind picked up around the tower. The bone-chilling wind made everyone want to pull their clothes closer. The cold wind whistled past, and the surrounding clouds and mist also disappeared under this cold wind. The entire platform became clear. Half a meter away, Yi Rong's eyes flashed with shock. She didn't understand why Yi Zichen would make such a decision. In her opinion, joining the ancient race was the best choice. So long as she could form a relationship with the ancient race, even if the outsiders attacked, the ancient race wouldn't be able to escape unscathed. Yi Rong absolutely didn't want to rely on the ancient race just because they were powerful. She simply wanted Yi Zichen to have an easier time in the future. She knew that the burden on his shoulders was far too heavy. The demons had yet to resolve their problems, while the Yao and Yao of the southern and northern kingdoms still held a grudge against him. Now that the outsiders had invaded the God realm, practically all of the burden was on his shoulders. As Yi Zichen's mother, she didn't want Yi Zichen to suffer so much. Her cultivation was limited, so the only way she could think of was through the ancient race. Gu Xuanda had extended an olive branch to Yi Zichen. If Yi Zichen agreed, joining the ancient race would be a matter of course. At most, he'd have to take on the surname Gu in the future, but that wasn't a big deal. Yi Rong's surname was Gu. At most, she'd taken back the surname that had once belonged to her. In other words, never mind Yi Zichen, if the ancient race extended an olive branch to any of the god, Yao, and demon clans, they'd refuse. No family could resist the temptation of joining the ancient race. Even giving up their family name, which had been passed down for tens of millions of years, wasn't impossible. Why had Yi Zichen refused? He'd refused without the slightest hesitation. He'd been so resolute. The cold wind blew away the clouds, and the sun in the sky, which was not very hot, sprinkled down white light. Yi Zichen stood a few meters away from Gu Xuanda, his back elongated by the sunlight. His long, narrow eyes narrowed into slits, and his lips curled into a mocking smile that contained a hint of cold determination. It was impossible for him to join the aboriginals. Never mind him, even great emperors like Shui Yang would ascend to the heavens in a single bound if they joined the ancient race. He knew very well how tempting it was to join the aboriginals, but he's not going in. Although it had been years since he'd last seen Gu Zichen, his tragic past still haunted Yi Zichen's mind like a nightmare. Following the footsteps of history, the future history would not change. He wanted to reverse the tragedy in Gu Zichen's plane, but he also wanted to do it for the sake of his family and friends. No matter what, he wouldn't repeat the same mistake. Even if the future development might be even worse, he decided to take a gamble. There was a long silence. This silence was so oppressive that it was hard to breathe. After Yi Zichen rejected him, Gu Xuanda didn't say anything else. He merely stood in front of Yi Zichen and stared deeply into his pitch-black eyes. "Xiaorong, you should go back." All of a sudden, Gu Xuanda waved his hand at Yi Rong calmly. From the way he spoke, it was impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. However, Yi Rong was incredibly nervous. She pursed her lips as if she wanted to say something, but Yi Zichen chuckled and grabbed her hand. "Don't worry. Perhaps the Gu family head wants to give me some psychological counseling. Don't worry and return to the star altar. No matter what, given the Gu family head's lofty status, would he care about a junior like me?" Yi Rong nodded, bowed to Gu Xuanda and Qinglan, then left. Before she left, Yi Zichen received a divine sense transmission in his sea of consciousness. In response, he simply nodded at Yi Rong, who kept glancing back as she left. His eyes brimmed with smiles. In the end, Yi Rong left the tower. To tell the truth, Yi Zichen still didn't understand why Gu Xuanda had called his mother over. Could it be that he wanted Yi Rong to bear witness to his joining the aboriginals? If that was the case, all he could say was that Gu Xuanda had been a bit overconfident. Without Yi Rong's presence in the tower, the atmosphere once again plunged below zero. Howling cold winds swirled around the platform, and mournful cries filled the air. Yi Zichen maintained his smile the entire time. When he saw that neither Gu Xuanda nor Qinglan had any intention of breaking the silence, he decided he might as well start the conversation again. "Family head Gu, I'm very sorry. I've betrayed your good intentions." "Ha, I'm surprised you're apologizing." Gu Xuanda snorted and sat down in front of a modern coffee table. There was a pot of steaming hot tea on top of the glass table. From the moment he'd entered the ancient city, Yi Zichen marveled at its modern architecture. He really wanted to know why there were such buildings here, and he'd been looking for an opportunity to answer his questions. Now seemed like the perfect opportunity. "Family head Gu, although I can't join the ancient race, I've betrayed your good intentions. However, I'm rather puzzled about your ancient city. I hope you can explain it to me." If it were any other virtuous and respected senior, there was a 90% chance that they'd be willing to teach him. Yi Zichen had encountered Gu Xuanda. Although he was also a man of great authority, someone who stood at the very peak of the world, There was no way he was a virtuous and respected senior. Unfortunately, Gu Xuanda was no virtuous and respected senior. Are you surprised that there are so many modern buildings here? Gu Xuanda arched his brows. That's right. When I first entered the city, I noticed that the buildings here are no different from the ones in the modern realm. The elevator I used to get to the top of the tower, and the coffee table you're using right now, are all products of the modern realm, said Yizichin. You want to know why they're here? Asked Gu Xuanda. That's right. Why should I? Gu Xuanda took a sip of his tea, his eyes flashing with ridicule. This ridicule was exactly the same as Yizichin's. Everything about the ancient city is a core secret of the ancient race. Since you're not a member of the ancient race, why should I explain your questions to you? Yizichin's expression instantly froze. However, Yizichin wasn't too surprised. His attitude towards Gu Xuanda wasn't exactly friendly, so it was normal for him to react this way. There was no way to explain Gu Xuanda's suspicions. Since that was the case, Senior, please leave. Yizichin wouldn't join the ancient race, and if he couldn't get an explanation for the modern buildings, there was no point in staying. With that, Yizichin turned around and headed for the elevator. Chapter 17:17. Yizichin, who was walking towards the elevator, suddenly stopped. His body was already warning him that if he took another step forward, his life might end here. The intense sense of danger caused Yizichin to be unable to leave recklessly. He took a few deep breaths as he faced the elevator, then clenched his right fist several times. Then, the serious expression on his face turned into a smile as he turned around. Before he could speak, he saw the coffee table turn to dust. Yizichin gulped. Although it wasn't difficult for him to smash the coffee table into dust, Gu Xuanda's actions clearly showed that he was angry. When an emperor was angry, blood flowed for thousands of miles. Although Gu Xuanda wasn't the emperor of the upper three realms, his status was higher than theirs. If he wanted to, he could make the upper three realms his playthings. What's more, if he wanted to kill Yizichin here, half-step transcendence. Killing Yizichin would only take a flick of his finger. Kid, you're going to get beaten up if you act like this, you know? Gu Xuanda narrowed his eyes and a cigar appeared in his mouth. He crossed his legs and didn't look like the head of a clan at all. He was clearly just a hooligan. He swung his legs and leaned against the back of the chair, occasionally puffing out a ring of smoke. Don't you know whose territory this is? This is Laozi's territory. Just ask anyone in the surrounding villages. Anyone who runs into me, Gu Xuanda, has to bow down and wag their tail like a dog. Who do you think you are? You think you can come and go as you please? Do I not care about face? Gulp. What's going on? Does Gu Xuanda have a split personality? Does his second personality have to be so sociopathic? Kid, Laozi is talking to you. Don't act like a mute. Weren't you very talkative just now? Gu Xuanda puffed out a puff of smoke and frowned at the shocked Yizichin. Senior, is there something wrong with your husband's head? Gu Xuanda's current situation was rather serious. He was like a completely different person. Yizichin didn't want to talk to a lunatic, so he could only look towards Qingli. Qingli smiled, but before she could say anything, Gu Xuanda threw the cigar in his hand onto the ground. Who did you say has a mental problem? Say it again if you have the guts. His expression made it seem as if he wanted to skin Yizichin alive. The cigar he'd tossed to the ground rolled several meters away. Green smoke rose from the black end of the cigar. Gu Xuanda also slapped his chair and wanted to fight Yizichin, but he didn't move for a long time. Qingli, what are you doing? Hurry up and stop me. Okay. When Qingli heard that, she ran over. Gu Xuanda also stood up from his chair and shouted, as if he was about to fight Yizichin to the death. Don't stop me. I must kill this brat today to go with my wine. His brain must be damaged. Yizichin stood a few meters away and watched Gu Xuanda act like a monkey in shock. Just then the cigar rolled to the bottom of his foot. He bent down and picked up the cigar, wanting to see if it was also a product of the modern world. Who told you to touch it? The moment the cigar entered his hand, Yi Zichen felt a suction force pull it into Gu Xuanda's. Then Gu Xuanda put the cigar in his mouth, causing Yi Zichen to grimace in disdain. Yi Zichen was certain that Gu Xuanda's mental illness was acting up, and it was quite serious. At a time like this, he needed to call the mental hospital and receive systematic treatment. People like Gu Xuanda, who posed a threat to society, needed to be treated meticulously. Unfortunately, the gods, yaos, and demons didn't have such an organization. Family head Gu, please calm down. Anger is bad for your health. You had to go along with this kind of manic patient. Yi Zichen bowed with a smile. At that moment, Gu Xuanda was no longer as irritated as before. He snorted coldly, then sat back down on the wooden chair. You're scared now. Scared, too scared. You're the Gu family head, a peerless expert half-step into the transcending realm. This junior is but a ruler. I haven't even condensed a Tao heart. How could I not be scared of you? Humph, at least you know what's good for you. Gu Xuanda snorted haughtily, still holding the cigar in his mouth. In that case, I'll ask you again. Are you going to join the Gu race or not? I'm not joining. That's more like it. Gu Xuanda sneered subconsciously. Suddenly, the satisfied look on his face disappeared, and he took out his cigar. He glared at him and asked, What did you say just now? I don't think I heard it clearly. Then you should get a doctor to examine you, said Yi Zichen. I said I'm not joining. You bastard. This time, Qingli understood. As soon as Gu Xuanda glared at her, she hurriedly blocked his path. No matter how he struggled, he couldn't get up. Qingli, hurry up and open the barrier. Gu Xuanda glared at her. What's wrong? Didn't you tell me to stop you? Asked Qingli in confusion. There's no need for you to stop me. This little bastard really is going to piss me off. I have to strangle him to death. Gu Xuanda was beyond furious. Divine power surged around him, and before Qingli could undo the barrier, he'd already broken it. Yi Zichen stood a few meters away, only to feel a fierce gust of wind brush past his face. A blur flashed before his eyes. By the time he came to his senses, Gu Xuanda was already in front of him, his right hand tightly gripping Yi Zichen's collar. Raging divine power surged around Yi Zichen. There was no way Yi Zichen could withstand the power of a half-step transcendent expert. In the blink of an eye, Yi Zichen's azure robes were torn to shreds, revealing the swirling flash armor he'd been wearing underneath. You're pretty smart. You know you're wearing divine battle armor underneath. Gu Xuanda's expression was solemn, but he didn't retract his grip on Yi Zichen's collar. I just don't know if that shitty divine artifact of yours can withstand spatial turbulence and storms. What do you mean? Before Yi Zichen could respond, he saw Gu Xuanda's left hand swipe through the air. It was as if the space around them had been sliced open, and a giant crack appeared. Xuanda. This time, even Qingli couldn't hold back. Earlier, she'd only been joking, but now, Gu Xuanda really wanted to teach Yi Zichen a lesson. Chapter 17-18. This situation was a bit difficult to deal with. It wasn't that Yi Zichen hadn't been to the outside before, but he'd only been to stable spaces. He'd never come into contact with a spatial rift as violent as the one before him. The rift opened up like a balloon, and a raging spatial storm swept through it. Yi Zichen glanced at the rift. The power of the spatial storm made him feel uneasy. He knew very well that this was his body's instincts warning him that he couldn't withstand a spatial storm like this. If he slipped up and fell inside, given his cultivation, he'd have a hard time surviving. The spatial storm wreaked havoc, and the cracks in the shattered dimensional space grew bigger and bigger. Yi Zichen could practically feel the spatial storm within the fissure brush against his face. How did things end up like this? Yi Zichen knew he'd gone a bit overboard just now. He'd disrespected Gu Xuanda, but that wasn't entirely his fault. Gu Xuanda had given him a show of strength as soon as he'd entered the city. If it weren't for Yi Zichen's strength, he might not even have been able to enter. After entering the tower, Gu Xuanda's tone was as cold as ever, and he'd inexplicably asked Yi Zichen to join the Gu race. Although Yi Zichen's upheaval alliance couldn't compare to the Gu race, he'd built it up bit by bit. He'd worked so hard to build up his faction, yet Gu Xuanda wanted him to submit to him with a single word. How could Yi Zichen agree? Besides, an invitation had to be sincere. Gu Xuanda's forceful attitude was forcing people to submit. What did he think he was? A gangster? If this were a society governed by law, he'd be shot. But no matter how much Yi Zichen resisted, the situation was already like this. No matter how forceful Gu Xuanda was, this wasn't the modern realm he'd once lived in. There was good law and order here. This was the upper realm. Here, Gu Xuanda was the local tyrant, and the Gu race was a peak-level clan whose mere mention made all other races tremble in fear. In a place like this, where the Gu race ruled alone, Yi Zichen had no place to complain. Clan head Gu. Yi Zichen chuckled and reached out to brush the dust off Gu Xuanda's shoulders. Unfortunately, Gu Xuanda had him by the collar, so Yi Zichen couldn't lift his arm. He could only hang in midair and smile awkwardly. "Why are you so angry? We can sit down and talk about it." Although the request to join the ancient race is hard to accept, as long as we sit down and discuss it properly, it is not impossible. "Don't talk so much nonsense. I don't have the patience." Gu Xuanda exerted force with his right hand and lifted Yi Zichen up, then placed him near the fissure. Yi Zichen heard the howling spatial tempest. His ear, which was closest to the spatial fissure, was already bleeding. Crimson blood dripped down his ear and into the fissure, only to be instantly swallowed up by the spatial tempest. Based on the amount of time the drop of blood had spent in the spatial storm, Yi Zichen could roughly estimate that if he'd entered, he definitely wouldn't have lasted more than an hour. More importantly, the aboriginals belonged to a dimensional space. This kind of space was separated from the vermilion space. It was much more difficult to find an exit in such a spatial rift than to accidentally fall into a spatial rift on the main plane. "Clan leader Gu, let's talk this out. Are you going to join or not?" Gu Xuanda ignored Yi Zichen's words completely. He continued to drag Yi Zichen into the spatial rift. "I'm the head of an alliance, after all. I have over a dozen emperors working for me. Practically everyone in the God realm is my people, and the Yao of the East are on good terms with me. If I join the aboriginals, shouldn't you give me some benefits? Even if you don't, you should at least bribe my subordinates. Joining the aboriginals is their past life's blessing. Bribe your subordinates? Don't even think about it. Don't talk to me about all that nonsense. I'm just asking you, are you going to join or not?" He really believed himself to be infallible. Just look at what Gu Xuanda had just said. Joining the aboriginals was their past life's blessing. He was truly blindly confident. Although the ancient race was one of the top races, it did not mean that everyone would want to join the ancient race. The way Yi Zichen saw it, there was no way the sacred ones of the God realm would rush to join the aboriginals. No matter what, they all had their own legacies and histories. Abandoning their clans for the sake of ascending to the heavens was not something they would choose. Besides, although their status in the upper three realms couldn't compare to the aboriginals, they were still at the peak. Gu Xuanda, on the other hand, was forcing people to join his clan without giving them any benefit. He wanted to swallow up the fruits of their labor and wealth. He really wasn't afraid of bursting to death. If they'd just talked things over, Yi Zichen might have given Gu Xuanda some face in light of the current dire situation, but Gu Xuanda was acting like this. At Yi Zichen's level, who wouldn't have a temper? When he heard Gu Xuanda's words, Yi Zichen's fury was instantly ignited. "Then don't even think about it. You want me to join your crappy clan? Not even a chance. If you think you can, throw me in there. It'd be best if I die in there. If I come out alive, one day, I'll slaughter your entire clan. Yi Zichen glared at him angrily. His words were full of gunpowder. Qingli, who'd wanted to stop him, covered her mouth in shock. Her eyes widened. Earlier, she'd wanted to comfort Gu Xuanda and tell him not to hold it against Yi Zichen. However, the instant Yi Zichen said those words, Qingli knew. There was no hope. Although Gu Xuanda was quite playful in private, Qingli knew that in his heart, nothing was more important than the Aboriginals. Even if Yi Zichen said he'd slaughter the Aboriginals out of anger, it was still not something Gu Xuanda could tolerate. What did you just say? I said, you'd best throw me in there and let me die. If I come out, I'll slaughter your entire clan, especially you, you old geezer. I dare you to say that again. I won't repeat myself twice. Don't bullshit me. If you have the guts, then throw me in. Yi Zichen's eyes practically spat fire, but Gu Xuanda reacted the same way. His grip on Yi Zichen's neck trembled uncontrollably. Then, he lifted Yi Zichen high into the air and lifted him above the spatial rift. Xuanda, don't. Chapter 1719. The moment Gu Xuanda let go, he foretold what Yi Zichen was about to face. The moment Yi Zichen fell into the spatial fissure, Gu Xuanda thought to himself that if he wasn't mistaken, the falling Yi Zichen should have made a middle finger gesture. This was an ancient city built entirely of modern architecture. How could Gu Xuanda not know what that finger represented? You little bastard! When Yi Zichen was thrown into the rift, he angrily lashed out at him with a blast of divine power, causing him to fall even more violently. Then he closed the rift. Out of sight, out of mind. By the time Qingli arrived, the rift had already healed. She stared blankly at the spatial rift, then thought back to the turbulent spatial storms within. Her expression froze involuntarily. You're crazy. Crazy? I'm very rational right now. That little bastard doesn't know what's good for him, so I'm teaching him a lesson. He's already very kind of me not to pay his tuition. How did I become crazy? Gu Xuanda sat back in his chair. He could tell that Yi Zichen had truly infuriated him. Even now, his chest heaved up and down heavily, and visible milky white air puffed out of his nostrils. That was true. He really was rational enough. If he'd really lost his mind, he wouldn't have just thrown Yi Zichen into the spatial turbulence. He'd have strangled him to death on the spot. Do you know what you threw him into? Qingli's lips quivered for a long while before she managed to speak. Isn't it just a spatial rift? You know? Qingli nearly jumped up in anger. She pointed at the spatial rift and shouted, a spatial rift. A spatial fault. Even martial emperors would find it hard to walk out alive. What's more, we're in a spatial rift. The chances of survival are even lower. Lil Rong's child is at most a divine general. Throwing him in there is no difference from killing him on the spot. So what? How are you going to explain it to Lil Rong? Do I need to explain it to her? Gu Xuanda glared at him. I'm the head of the Gu clan. She's just a direct descendant of the Gu clan. I can do whatever I want. Do I need to explain it to her? Gu Xuanda was furious. If he had not smashed the coffee table into powder, he might have smashed the table too. To his surprise, Qingli, who had been shouting at him earlier, suddenly pouted her lips and burst into tears. Little Li, don't touch me. Qingli said with a wronged expression, you actually dared to be mean to me just now. You even yelled at me that you would spoil me when we got married. I even gave birth to a daughter for you. Don't cry. I was wrong. Gu Xuanda squatted beside Qingli. The anger in his eyes had long disappeared. It was my fault just now. It's all that brat Yi Zichen's fault. My anger is directed at him, not at you. Don't cry, okay? Even if you're angry, you can't throw him down. If what the white-robed man said is true, then Yi Zichen won't die at all. I'm sure of that. Gu Xuanda patted Qingli's shoulder. At this moment, the elevator door of the tower suddenly opened. Gu Luolin, who had her hair in pigtails, skipped over and saw the scene in front of her. Both Qingli and Gu Xuanda quickly regained their usual composure. Gu Xuanda looked at Gu Luolin with a serious expression. "Why did you come back?" Gu Luolin's fear towards Gu Xuanda came from the bottom of her heart. Gu Luolin, who clearly noticed that Qingli had cried, did not dare to say anything when she saw Gu Luolin's gaze. She merely lowered her head and twirled her fingers. "I forgot about something." "What, can't you say later?" "No, it's rather urgent." Gu Luolin licked her lips. Gu Luolin licked her lips and the ponytail on her head swayed. Her quick-witted eyes carefully scanned her surroundings. Where's my nephew? Did he already leave?" As the saying goes, you have to touch a sore spot. Gu Xuanda's expression instantly darkened when she mentioned Yi Zichen. Gu Luolin quickly lowered her head when she noticed the change in his expression. Qingli couldn't help but glare at Gu Xuanda, then walked in front of Gu Luolin and whispered, "He already left." "He has already left. What else do you want from him?" "Oh, actually, I'm not looking for him. It's you, Mother." It was obvious that Gu Luolin was still nervous. As she spoke, she pinched the hem of her clothes, afraid that Gu Xuanda would yell at her. "What's wrong, Mother?" asked Qingli gently. "Didn't you say I had an uncle? You just separated a long time ago and you've been looking for him this whole time." "That's right, what's wrong?" I went to the Transcendence Palace to play. I think I saw him." Gu Luolin's voice grew softer and softer until it was almost inaudible. Even so, Qingli still heard everything she said. Her eyes blazed with a fiery light. Her fervent eagerness caused the temperature around the platform to soar. "You saw your Uncle Qinglan?" "That's right. I saw him with Yi Zichen, and it seems he's on good terms with him." Suddenly, Qingli's body stiffened. The Yao Ceiling Pagoda. It had to be the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. She'd wondered if Qingli had entered the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Ever since Qingli became a half-step transcendence cultivator, she'd searched for Qinglan for 10,000 years. She'd visited the outer realms, the lichas, and even the god realms. The only place she hadn't gone was a spatial divine artifact. She'd wondered if Qinglan was in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, but she knew how strong he was. The Five Elements' great emperor wasn't strong enough to capture him. There was only one explanation for Qinglan entering the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. As she considered this, Qingli asked anxiously, "Then does your uncle Qinglan have anyone else with him?" "Yes." Gu Luolin nodded and said, "Uncle Qinglan has an uncle with great strength. I think that uncle's strength is stronger than that of Dad and Mom." "Big brother Tsang Xiong," said Qingli. That's right. Gu Luolin nodded vigorously. "I think Yi Zichen called him Uncle Tsang Xiong." Gu Luolin, Qingli, and her mother kept talking to each other, but Gu Xuanda, who was standing behind them, somehow had a bad feeling about this. He'd been worried about this possibility, so he hadn't dared interrupt. In fact, he even considered sneaking away. "Stop right there." Just as Gu Xuanda was about to slip away, Qingli's cold voice exploded in his ears. Chapter 1720. Outside the realm. The vastness of the universe was something humans would never be able to fully grasp. In this vast, primordial space, 3 tiny figures shuttled back and forth. No matter how fast they moved, they couldn't cause even the slightest ripple. Gone. They stopped in the midst of the primordial space. All they could see was darkness and primal chaos. Behind them, they could vaguely make out a few tiny, dust-like planets. The one who spoke was none other than the great sage, who'd transformed into a supreme treasure and was clad in Fairy Xixia's matching robes. He hefted the Rui Jingu Bang, his fiery eyes of gold twinkling. In the darkness of the primordial chaos, they were like 2 bright lanterns. He looked around, his hands still on his eyebrows. He bent down slightly, as if searching for something. "Monkey, what's wrong with you?" We trusted you so much, yet you're telling us you lost it? Yang Jian couldn't help but glare. The three people in the sky were, of course, the great sage, Yang Jian, and Su Luer, the queen of the foxes, who'd been sent outside to investigate the Yuan Breaker beast. Didn't you say your fiery eyes of gold could see us? We've been chasing that big guy's ass the whole time, and now you're telling me it's gone? When Yang Jian and the others had come to investigate the Yuan Breaker beast, they'd first gone to the area surrounding the annihilated advance guard. Speaking of which, they were lucky. When they arrived, the Yuan Breaker beast was still happily enjoying its meal. Naturally, they also saw the heroes who died tragically at the Yuan Breaker beast's hands. They ran into Yang Jian and the others, and as expected, the three of them attacked the Yuan Breaker beast. Just as Su Luer had said, the Yuan Breaker beast in the video was truly ferocious. Even imperial lords like them couldn't help but shudder when they saw it. However, when they actually clashed with the beast, they realized the Yuan Breaker beast wasn't as fierce as they'd imagined. It was undeniable that the Yuan Breaker beast was somewhat strong, but that was only because of its enormous size. That was its advantage. Unfortunately, its attacks were too simplistic. Or perhaps it was better to say that it was unintelligent and only retained the most primitive instincts of a wild beast. Meeting Yang Jian and the others had also determined the fate of this Yuan-breaking beast. After fighting for less than an hour, this Yuan-breaking beast, which was several hundred feet tall, was already severely injured. It knew that it was no match for him and fled. The size of its body did not affect its agility at all. It could also be that it had an advantage in the void of primal chaos that belonged to its species. Even with their speed, Yang Jian and the others were unable to catch up to it. They could only follow behind it, following the smell of blood and its back. However, because their journey was too long, they were already in the primal chaos. Fortunately, after becoming a ruler, his need for oxygen was no longer as severe. Although there was no air in the chaos void that humans could rely on to survive, Yang Jian and the others could absorb other elements to prevent themselves from suffocating. However, the special environment still caused their divine senses to be unable to extend beyond a kilometer. In this environment, Yang Jian's heaven's eye could only see about 2 kilometers away. Only the great sage's fiery eyes of truth could see everything clearly from 10,000 meters away. As a result, the job of leading the way naturally fell onto the great sage's shoulders. Who would have thought that in less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the great sage would lose track of him? Monkey! Yang Jian sighed heavily. He pointed at the great sage, unable to say anything for a long time. If they lost the injured Yuan Breaker beast, then their only lead would be cut off. They would no longer be able to truly investigate the situation of the Outerium gods. Fortunately, they did not return empty-handed. At the very least, they knew that the Yuan Break beast was not as fierce as they had imagined. Its strength was at most at the Emperor realm. If they sent enough dominators, they would be able to kill it. Moreover, its attacks were simple. It had no self-awareness. The intelligent human race and the intelligent demon race had an advantage. This time, the rare great sage didn't retort. He knew that losing the Yuan Breaker beast was his problem. Earlier, he'd confidently patted his chest and guaranteed that there wouldn't be any mistake. What do we do now? The great sage licked his lips, his expression unnatural. What else can we do? Let's go back and tell Yi and the others about our findings. Hopefully, it'll be of some use. Yang Jian shrugged. Actually, he was unwilling to give up. They'd already chased to this point. They were so close to catching the Yuan Breaker beast. They might even know where the Outerium god's nest was. The only disadvantage the Third Era had against the Outerium gods was the enemy's mysteriousness. They didn't know how the Outerium gods' experts were, nor where their nest was. It was because of this unknown that the Third Era's people were shrouded in darkness. Even more infuriating was that even if the Outerium gods' attack failed, they could return to their nest to rest. The third era didn't know where their nest was, so they could only defend bitterly. Just a little more. Yang Jian clenched his fists tightly. However, no matter how unwilling he was, it was useless. The trail had already been cut off. The Yuan Breaker beast must have found a safe place to recuperate. While they were here, it might have already returned to the clan. Even if the great sage stayed here, it wouldn't help. Perhaps when the Yuan Breaker beast recovered, it would bring its clansmen to cause trouble. Although they were elite imperial lords and could take on several Yuan Breaker beasts on their own, no one knew how many clansmen the Yuan Breaker beast would bring with it. However, nobody knew how many clansmen the Aura Breaker beast would bring with it. What's more, Yi Zichen had already said that the Aura Breaker beast was merely the lowest level of existence. Above them were gods with intelligence. Those gods were undoubtedly much stronger than the Yuan Breaker beast. Perhaps they were even beast tamers. With them leading the way, the Yuan Breaker beast's lack of intelligence would actually become its advantage. The great sage agreed with their decision to go back the way they'd come. However, they didn't leave right away. They knew full well that Su Luer had the final say. They'd come to the outside because they'd followed her. Luer. The great sage was Yuan Hong's older brother, so he was somewhat close to Su Luer. He whispered to Su Luer, but Su Luer didn't respond in the slightest. She didn't seem to have any intention of retreating, either. Let's go back. The great sage couldn't help but ask. Yang Jian nodded. To his surprise, Su Luer advanced another 100 meters. Because she cultivated the breath of ice, her hair had long since turned silver white. Chapter 1721. Ice surged. The Fox Empress had once said that Su Luer's talent for ice was even greater than hers. Earlier, during the Central Divine Mountains Heavenly God City competition, Su Luer's breath of ice had already revealed its true power. Even the Holy Maiden had found it difficult to defend against it. After so much time had passed, her breath of ice had grown even more powerful. Empress Su Qinyan had also deliberately trained her, so her breath of ice had reached a frightening level. There was no movement of air, but as Su Luer unleashed her divine power, a storm of ice appeared. With her as the center, the surrounding primal chaos was covered in frost and snow. Big sis, don't tell me you want to seal off the entire area? Off in the distance, Yang Jian couldn't help but gulp at the sight of Su Luer, who looked like a queen of ice and snow. The surrounding space was simply too vast, and the surrounding elemental essence was extremely sparse. No matter how you looked at it, it was a crazy idea to seal it all in ice. The storm of ice wreaked havoc. In the blink of an eye, the pitch-black primal chaos had transformed into a world of ice and snow. Although it was still pitch-black, a layer of pure white ice had formed beneath the primal chaos. Ice had the effect of shaping. Any kind of concealment effect would have nowhere to hide under the shape of the ice. The great sage and Yang Jian, who'd wanted to leave earlier, stayed behind. If Su Luer didn't leave, they naturally wouldn't abandon her. So, they opened their heavenly eyes and flame eyes and used Su Luer's ice to search for any traces left behind by the Aura Breaker beast. Monkey, come here. Suddenly, Yang Jian dashed several hundred meters to his left. When the great sage heard this, he hurried over and saw an especially large layer of ice condensing in front of him. He leapt into the air and looked down. This layer of ice. Footprints. The great sage's eyes lit up. Only that Aura Breaker beast could leave behind such enormous footprints. Yes, these are footprints. Not only that, but look around. There are traces of dried blood. Yang Jian nodded, but when they saw the footprints, they couldn't help but glance at each other. They could see the shock in each other's eyes. This shock was directed at Su Luer. Primal chaos. The space in front of him was a stretch of primal chaos. Even if there were any traces left behind in this void, they would be erased by the surging primal chaos. On her own, Su Luer had frozen the surging primordial chaos with her icy aura. And the blood of the Yuan-breaking beast, what kind of strength was that? What are you waiting for? Why aren't you chasing him? At that moment, Su Luer suddenly appeared beside them. By the time they came to their senses, Su Luer was already several hundred meters ahead. Releasing the ice-cold aura, the entire icy space was under his control. Everything that appeared inside was within her perception. The moment the ferocious beast's footprints appeared, she already knew the direction of the beast's footprints. Naturally, she didn't need to come here to confirm it. She directly chased after the beast. Furthermore, she knew that the footprints were very fresh, as were the frozen blood. From this, it could be deduced that the Yuan Breaker beast wouldn't be able to run for long. Perhaps the Yuan Breaker beast had been right next to them, but had used its life force to hide in the chaos. Even the great sage's fiery eyes of truth couldn't detect its presence. Seeing that Su Luer had already chased after it, Yang Jian and the great sage exchanged a glance, then chased after it. The footprints are getting fresher and fresher, and so is the blood. Since the Yuan-breaking beast could hide in the primal chaos, the great sage's task was now Su Luer, who could use the ice-cold aura to create its track. Every 1,000 meters they chased after the footprints, they would stop and use the ice-cold aura to form the Yuan-breaking beast's footprints and continue their pursuit. Even as they paused, the Yuan-breaking beast's footprints and blood became fresher and fresher. It was clear that the Yuan-breaking beast's injuries were severe, and it was on the verge of exhaustion. The clues were right in front of them. The trio sped up, but, after chasing for tens of thousands of meters, Yang Jian's brows furrowed. The footprints are getting fresher and fresher. After them, Su Luer once again used the ice-cold aura to form the footprints, then retracted it into her body. She'd used the ice-cold aura so frequently, and she couldn't recover her divine power in the void. Her face was already pale. Even so, after condensing the footprints, she still led the charge. This time, however, Yang Jian pulled her back. Take a pill to recover divine power. Monkey, you too. It won't be too late to take it after we catch the Yuan-breaking beast. It's already on the verge of exhaustion. Even if I can't participate in the battle, the two of you are more than enough to subdue it. Su Luer furrowed her brows. Let's not waste time here. It took so much effort to get so close to it. If we delay any longer, it's definitely going to get away. With a wave of her hand, Su Luer chased after it. The great sage listened to Yang Jian and tossed a pill into his mouth. As the two of them chased after Su Luer, he said, "O.L. Yang, did you notice something wrong? Monkey, don't you think it's strange? Monkey, don't you think it's strange? Don't you feel like we've been tricked?" said Yang Jian, his gaze grave. What do you mean? The great sage didn't understand. From the very beginning, we thought that Yuan-breaking beast was on the verge of exhaustion and couldn't run for much longer. But as you can see, we've already chased it for almost 100,000 meters, but we still haven't caught it. We can only eat its dust from behind, said Yang Jian. That's not a problem, is it? Even wild beasts have a desire to live. That's true. Just as Yang Jian spoke, Su Luer stopped in front of him. She released her ice-cold aura and condensed the Yuan-breaking beast's footprint. She'd used the ice-cold aura so frequently and hadn't recovered at all. In the end, she couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood. Even so, she didn't care. She madly circulated the power of ice in her body. Until... footprints. So many footprints. After Su Luer released her ice-cold aura, Yang Jian and the others no longer saw a single set of footprints. Instead, they saw hundreds, even thousands. They were right in the middle of these footprints, completely surrounded by them. Oh no! Yang Jian was the first to glare at Su Luer, grab her by the arm, and charge out. Chapter 1722. The spatial storms were like sharp blades, slicing through the barriers Yi Zichen had formed with his divine power. The situation was far worse than Yi Zichen had imagined. The storm's razor-sharp edges slammed into the barriers around him. After forming the barriers, Yi Zichen could clearly feel his divine power draining away in order to maintain its stability. It consumed an enormous amount of divine power. Yi Zichen had to continuously consume divine-grade spirit recovery pills to maintain the barrier's stability. After falling into the spatial fault, Yi Zichen's eyes were bloodshot, but he regained his clarity of mind. He regretted a bit, but now that he was here, he truly realized what a terrible decision he'd made. His pills would eventually run out. If he wanted to leave this place alive, he had to find a spatial passageway and leave before he ran out of pills. There was no end to the pitch-black space. Yi Zichen gathered flames in his palm, causing the space to glow faintly. What came into view was an endless spatial fault, and from time to time, they would encounter some small devouring black holes. Although they were small, these black holes were over 100 meters in diameter. The black holes were like the maws of primordial beasts. Their suction force was so strong that they sucked in everything around them. Then, they never appeared again. No one knew where these black holes led to. Yi Zichen carefully avoided the black hole's range and walked through the spatial fault as if treading on thin ice. He's definitely out of his mind. Yi Zichen swallowed another pill, then glanced at the empty bottle. He couldn't help but curse. His curses were naturally directed at Gu Xuanda. After entering the spatial fault, Yi Zichen had reflected on his own mistake. In truth, the current situation was inextricably linked to him. However, Gu Xuanda was the head of the Gu clan, a major expert. It was said that the prime minister was magnanimous. Gu Xuanda could be considered a local tyrant of the upper plains. Why did he have to be so narrow-minded? Yi Zichen was young and impetuous, but was Gu Xuanda also young and impetuous? If the Upheaval Alliance found out about this, Yi Zichen couldn't guarantee what would happen to the others, but the great sage, Yang Jian, and the others would definitely fight Gu Xuanda to the death. He didn't want to put his friends and family in danger because of him. He had to get out alive. Unfortunately, although that was what Yi Zichen thought, he wasn't very confident. The range of the spatial fault was simply too wide, and the spatial storms here made it even more difficult for him to move. In an hour's time, he hadn't explored much of the spatial fault, but he had consumed quite a lot of medicinal pills. Divine-grade spirit recovery pill. Only a divine-grade alchemist could refine a pill. Although there were many alchemists in the god race, divine-grade alchemists were scarce. Even with old Lord Taishang's skill in alchemy, it would take him at least half a month to produce one batch. There were no more than 7 pills in one cauldron. There was no need to think about the other alchemists. The time spent and the number of cauldrons opened was much longer and much less. Furthermore, it wasn't as if divine-grade pill refiners could only refine one pill. Most of the divine-grade pill refiners in the Upheaval Alliance were refining the pills on the parchment. As a result, even the Upheaval Alliance was in short supply of divine-grade spirit-recovering pills, and they couldn't possibly supply Yi Zichen alone. He didn't have many spiritual recovery pills either. The huge consumption caused Yi Zichen to run out of pills. However, he had plenty of normal spirit-recovering pills. He had plenty of ordinary spirit-recovering pills, but they couldn't keep up with his divine power consumption. Ancient race, you're really something. Yi Zichen angrily put the empty pill bottle back into his spatial divine artifact. Although there were no more pills inside, it was still quite valuable. As the head of the Upheaval Alliance, he had so many subordinates to feed, so he naturally had to live frugally. It was illusory. There was no hope in Yi Zichen's eyes. All he could see was the storm of blades cutting into the barrier. He knew very well that the moment the spirit formation shattered would be the moment he would lose his life in the underworld. There's no cell signal either. Yi Zichen glanced at his phone, then took a deep breath and put it back in his pocket. Yi Zichen stood in the pitch-black void. He didn't know why, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of sorrow and despair. Was he really going to die here? It wasn't as if Yi Zichen had never been in dire straits before. It was just that compared to what he was facing now, they paled in comparison. That wasn't all. He had the Emperor Star's fortune on him. Whenever he was in dire straits, someone would always appear to help him. This time, he hoped someone would appear, but his chances were slim. He didn't think anyone would be so stupid as to jump into a spatial storm for no reason. Little did he know, there really was an idiot in the world who jumped into a spatial rift of his own accord. That person was Gu Xuanda. It wasn't bad that Gu Xuanda was the head of the ancient race. His cultivation was extraordinary too. He was in control of the ancient race, whose very name struck fear in the hearts of the three realms. Unfortunately, he was a henpecked husband. The second Qing Li glared at him, he'd resolutely and without hesitation ripped open a spatial rift and jumped down. Spatial rifts were random. Even if the spatial rift was a millisecond off, the two of them might be thousands of miles apart. Gu Xuanda had jumped into the rift to search for Yi Zichen, but all he could do was pray that Yi Zichen didn't die in there. His search was like looking for a needle in a haystack. In the blink of an eye, another hour passed. There's still one more bottle. Yi Zichen looked at the pile of empty bottles in his spatial ring and sighed in disappointment. On average, a bottle contained 10 pills. In other words, if Yi Zichen didn't find the exit before he ran out of pills, he'd be stuck here forever. I haven't left any descendants from my family yet. Yi Zichen muttered to himself, but his gaze was sharp as he scanned his surroundings. Any spatial rift had a way out. Even a spatial rift in a different dimension was no exception. He knew this very well, and he clung to that last sliver of hope. Suddenly, a dim, silver light appeared in the pitch-black space. The silver light was very long, like a silver thread cutting through the heavens. Although it was dim, it was still very eye-catching in the pitch-black environment. This was the only abnormal phenomenon Yi Zichen had seen in the spatial rift for a full 2 hours. With practically no hesitation at all, Yi Zichen dashed towards the silver light. He wasn't sure if the silver light was the exit to the fault, but it might be hiding even more dangerous dangers. But he had to go. Chapter 1723. As Yi Zichen drew closer, he noticed that the silver light was in motion. Fortunately, it wasn't particularly fast. Given Yi Zichen's speed through the spatial storms, he should be able to see its true form in less than an hour. Could there be living creatures in the spatial cracks too? Since it could move, Yi Zichen naturally thought of living creatures. The only thing that made him a little hesitant was that if that silver light really came from a creature, that creature's body was a little too big. At the very least, Yi Zichen couldn't see where the silver light ended. It was as if the silver light had cut through the pitch-black spatial cracks. No matter what the silver light's true form was, Yi Zichen decided to step forward and take a look. He spared no effort in circulating his divine power. While maintaining the barrier's stability, he inched closer and closer to the silver light. 10 minutes passed. During this period of time, something happened that made Yi Zichen want to retreat. The silver light seemed to have sensed him and changed its direction in an attempt to approach him. Yi Zichen had long since suspected it was a living creature, but at the time, he'd wanted to retreat. However, when the silver light drew closer, he realized that it wasn't the living creature he'd imagined. The silver light was still a distance away, but it was no longer a silver thread. Instead, it resembled a long, silver pillar. Yi Zichen could only vaguely make out what seemed like a building. When he got closer to the silver light, he gradually saw the true form of the building. It was a long hallway. Yi Zichen couldn't tell how long it was. At least, as far as he could see, the hallway didn't seem to end. It was about 10 meters tall and entirely silvery white. The silver light he'd seen earlier had come from the building's surface. The raging spatial storms hadn't left a single mark on its silvery surface. This was absolutely good news for Yi Zichen. Maintaining the barrier's stability had consumed too much of his energy. Even with a constant supply of pills and a high level of concentration, he'd still consumed a great deal of his mental energy. What he needed now was a safe haven against the spatial storms, a place where he could recover both his divine power and mental energy. Rest. This hallway was absolutely the perfect place. Yi Zichen didn't hesitate for too long. After confirming that there was no danger in the corridor, he entered it. "I'm finally in." When he entered the hallway, Yi Zichen sat on the ground and panted heavily. Speaking of which, this hallway was rather strange. He could enter the entrance, but the storm outside couldn't. The raging spatial storm could only howl outside, but it had no effect on the corridor. The hallway was pitch black. Yi Zichen paced back and forth at the entrance for the time it takes to brew a few cups of tea. There were no decorations or embellishments on the walls. It could be said that it was completely empty. However, as Yi Zichen stood in the hallway, he felt a sense of familiarity. However, he no longer had the energy to think about it. After confirming that the hallway was safe, Yi Zichen's tense nerves finally relaxed. His tense nerves relaxed slightly, and exhaustion surged into his heart like a tidal wave. Yi Zichen took out some wood from his spatial ring and started a bonfire, then leaned against the corner of the wall and sat down. While he felt tired, his eyelids also became heavy. This wasn't good news for Yi Zichen. He knew very well that no matter how exhausted he was, this wasn't the time to rest. At that moment, Yi Zichen, who still had a sliver of consciousness, saw a blur before his eyes. The blur had stopped in front of his bonfire. He did his best to wake himself up, but tiredness washed over him like a tidal wave. It destroyed his last bit of willpower, and he fell into a deep slumber. Just before he fell asleep again, he saw a pair of pitch-black warlock boots slowly approach him. Chaos City. Ever since Chaos City was founded, the Upheaval Alliance had always been wary of the outside. Practically all of the Alliance's higher-ups had their sights set on the outside. Countless vanguard squads had scouted the outside, but unfortunately, aside from the one they'd killed, the Upheaval Alliance hadn't received any further information. The video Su Lu had criticized had become the only thing they knew about the outside. Sitting in the tall tower, Xiao Yumei held the video she brought back before. She didn't know how many times she'd watched this video, and the technical department had done countless data analysis on the yuan-breaking beast in the video. The results were just as accurate as Su Lu's analysis. If they wanted to know the aura-breaking beast's true strength, they couldn't make an accurate judgment based on this video alone. During this time, the emperors of the Divine Mountains had paid a visit, and they'd all seen the video. Their answers were the same. Xiao Yumei's eyes flashed with exhaustion. In order to share Yi Zichen's burden, she'd taken the initiative to manage the Upheaval Alliance. As the Vice Alliance head, she had far too many things to handle. She had to keep track of the geniuses the Yaoan gods had sent into the divine artifact. Zuemo and Old Lord Taishang had to keep up with their pill refinement and construction. The aura-breaking beasts were something she couldn't let go of, and she had to comfort the elemental spirits on the top floor. He's been gone for half a month. Why isn't he back yet? Xiao Yumei looked up at the blue sky outside the tower, her words brimming with longing for Yi Zichen. It wasn't that she wanted Yi Zichen to come back and share her burdens. All she needed was a shoulder to lean on whenever she felt tired. She'd thought that Yi Zichen's trip to the ancient race would take at least a few days, or at most half a month. Who would have thought that as soon as he left, there would be no news of him? She silently glanced at her phone, then opened her chat window with Yi Zichen. Xiao Yumei's messages were all over the screen, but they were like stones sinking into the ocean. She received no response at all. Managing the company in the modern realm had been tiring, but now she wanted to return to the modern realm and manage the company. She didn't want to spend her days in this chaotic world, burdened by exhaustion. I really don't know when I'll be able to rest. Xiao Yumei quietly set her phone aside and pinched her temples. She wanted to relax, but at that moment, the sound of something piercing through the air rang out outside the tower. Xiao Yumei had just closed her eyes, but when she opened them, she saw Xiao Yan hurriedly rush into the hall. Big sister! Vice Alliance head. Xiao Yumei knit her brows. Chapter 1724. Xiao Yan had already left the tower before Xiao Yumei's words had even left. Xiao Yumei had no choice but to put her phone in her pocket, then rush to the city gates, her eyes flickering with exhaustion. This was something she had to deal with every day. Chaos City's gate. Xiao Hu and Su Yan stood facing each other. It was obvious that Su Yan was ready to attack, and her divine power of life was leaking out of her. Xiao Hu, on the other hand, knew Su Yan was special, so he could only brace himself and endure. "Please, don't make things difficult for us." Xiao Hu cupped his hands, his tone imploring. Su Yan wasn't from Chaos City, but her relationship with Yi Zichen was an unspoken secret. Xiao Yumei had repeatedly mentioned that she needed to take care of Su Yan. When Xiao Hu learned that Su Yan wanted to go to the outside, he'd learned this from one of her maids. She wanted to go to the outside? At this moment, the outer realm could be said to be filled with danger everywhere. It was not a place that anyone could go. Su Yan had condensed the god of life's godhead. Her true strength lay in her divine power of life, but her attacks were far weaker than others. At most, they were at the level of a divine general. With such a weak attack method, who could bear the responsibility if something happened to her when she headed to the outer realms? Never mind everything else, just the wrath of the nine-tailed fox clan wasn't something subordinates like them could withstand. Furthermore, if Yi Zichen, the alliance head, found out, wouldn't he skin them alive? Thus, no matter what, Xiao Hu and the others couldn't let Su Yan leave. Even if they wanted to leave, they'd have to wait until Xiao Yumei arrived. "I'm not making things difficult for you. You're the ones making things difficult for me. I'm not from Chaos City. I'm just staying here for a few days. I want to go back to the Fox clan. What right do you have to stop me?" Even though she was angry, Su Yan's tone was still gentle. However, he could sense her anxiety from her eyes. Otherwise, she wouldn't have mobilized all the divine power in her body. "Don't joke around. If you want to go back to the Fox clan, we naturally won't stop you. In fact, we'll send people to escort you back. It's just that you're going to the outside, and the outside is extremely dangerous. How could we dare let you go there? How about this? Please don't be impatient. Our steward has already." She went to look for Deputy Chief Xiao. "When she arrives, what do you think?" Xiao Hu smiled apologetically. "Get out of the way," Su Yan shouted as she bit her lips. "Little Yan." At that moment, Xiao Yumei hurried over from the tower. The surrounding upheaval alliance members bowed deeply to her. "Vice Guild Master. You guys go back to work. I'll take care of this." Hearing this, the members left one after another. At this time, Xiao Yumei also walked over to Su Yan. "Sister, what's wrong with you? Why do you suddenly want to go to the outer realms?" "Sister Yumei, suddenly," Xiao Yumei's expression froze. Less than half a breath later, she called out to Xiao Yan and Xiao Hu, who hadn't gotten far yet. "Xiao Yan, Xiao Hu, summon all the alliance elders to the tower for a meeting." In the long corridor, Yi Zichen leaned against the wall and tilted his head, while a myriad of emotions flashed across his face. He really had fallen asleep, and he was sound asleep. During this time, he'd had an extremely strange dream, so strange that he didn't know what it was trying to convey. In his dreams, he always felt a pair of hands constantly caressing his chest, and from time to time, they would also touch his arms and legs. Fire! Suddenly, a shout reached Yi Zichen's ears, and his dream really did turn into a sea of fire. "Fire, fire!" Yi Zichen muttered to himself as he jolted awake. Then he sensed someone touching his chest. "You're awake?" The person touching his chest smiled kindly. Yi Zichen looked down and saw a pair of slightly deformed hands on his chest. He looked up and saw a huge head. What was even stranger was that the head's eyes were ridiculously large. They practically took up the entire head's entire head. They practically took up a quarter of the head. F***ck. Yi Zichen kicked the alien aside, shot to his feet, and examined his body repeatedly. "You really aren't friendly." After all, Yi Zichen was a divine general expert. He didn't dare claim to be particularly strong, but he wasn't someone ordinary people could withstand. He didn't have any strength left in his kick just now, but the alien, who took a solid kick, didn't seem to be injured at all. The alien merely patted off the dust on its body, then walked towards Yi Zichen once again. "Stop right there!" Yi Zichen glared at the alien, then drew the Xianyuan sword and pointed it forward. "What kind of Yao are you? Let me tell you, the great sage equal to heaven and the great monster-slaying emperor is my sworn brother. If you take another step forward, my brother will smash your head in." The alien really did stop. Yi Zichen licked his lips and asked, "What were you touching my body just now? You really aren't friendly, kid. Just now, I noticed your blood flow was a bit clogged, so I helped you clear it. It's fine if you don't appreciate it, but you even kicked me," said the alien. "Is that so? In that case, I have to thank you." Yi Zichen examined his body. After confirming that there were no problems, he stuck to the wall and pointed the Xianyuan sword at the alien. "Then what do you do?" "Me? We haven't seen each other for long. Have you forgotten already?" The alien chuckled. "Ordinary people rarely get to visit me even once in their entire lives. You're pretty lucky. You've come twice. But this time, it seems you ran into some sort of trouble before coming here. You." When he heard the alien's words, Yi Zichen instinctively wiped his eyes, then looked around in astonishment. No wonder he'd felt so familiar when he first entered. This was the time corridor. The last time he'd entered the time corridor, he'd encountered it on his way from the Fox clan to the lower realms. At the time corridor was still in the main dimension. How had it mysteriously ended up in a subdimension? The location of the time corridor is unpredictable. That's why running into it even once is a blessing from the heavens. The alien seemed to have read Yi Zichen's thoughts. He chuckled. Yi Zichen licked his lips and pointed at the alien, who was only 1.4 meters tall and strangely shaped. "Then aren't you?" Chapter 1725. That familiar tone, that familiar action. Yi Zichen looked at the arrogant dwarf. He hadn't guessed it would really be him. To be able to meet an old friend in such a harsh environment was really something to be excited about. However, Yi Zichen quickly wiped his surprise away, raised his hand, and slapped the dwarf on the head. "You'd better shut up." Yi Zichen absolutely wasn't angry. This was just his way of greeting the dwarf. Yi Zichen was certain that if he remembered their first meeting, the dwarf would definitely reminisce about that familiar feeling, and that familiar slap. It felt just like before, just as painful. Yi Zichen looked at his reddened palm, and recalled that familiar sensation. He couldn't help but reminisce. "You! How rude!" The dwarf glared at him and roared. He was the great demon Pilar. Demons reign supreme over all other races. How could he allow someone to touch the back of his noble head? However, with his appearance and height, even when he was angry, he still looked comical. Threatening? That didn't exist at all. "Oh, look at you. Why are you so angry? I'm just saying hello to you." Yi Zichen chuckled and patted him on the shoulder. "Don't tell me that slap just now didn't give you the slightest sense of familiarity?" Familiarity. The dwarf pursed his lips and muttered to himself for a moment. He really did feel a bit familiar. "Humph, the great Mr. Pilar will let you off this time." "No problem, Shorty. Call me the great Mr. Pilar, or Lord Demon." "No problem, Shorty." In front of the bonfire, Yi Zichen and Pilar sat against opposite walls. From the entrance, they could still see the raging storm outside. Pilar wanted to resist when Yi Zichen called him Shorty, but Yi Zichen ignored his attempts. In the end, he could only let Yi Zichen call him that. However, he still repeated that he was the great demon. "Shorty, call me the great Mr. Pilar, or Lord Demon." Pilar was furious, but he couldn't beat Yi Zichen in martial arts. He could only sulk. "What? The time corridor is moving, right? When will we be able to leave this place?" "The great Pilar doesn't know." Yi Zichen couldn't help but slap Pilar's head from afar. Pilar was infuriated, but when he looked at this powerful guy with no sense of propriety, all he could do was silently urge himself not to bicker with him. Pilar swore that if Yizichen dared act so impudently in his kingdom, he'd definitely pay the price. "Hey, you're quite an interesting fellow." Yizichen leaned against the wall and grinned at Pilar. "You're clearly just a little dwarf with no magical power, yet you insist on calling yourself a lord and calling yourself a demon. The great Pilar is a devil. Is that so? Why didn't the great Mr. Devil have the slightest bit of demonic energy? When I was reading in the modern realm, the demon race was one of the most powerful races, almost comparable to the god race. Pah! How can the despicable god race compare to our demon race?" At the mention of the extraterritorial celestial race, Pilar spat out. Yizichen saw thick hatred in his eyes. It was obvious he knew about the god race, and he'd held a grudge against them for a long time. His hateful gaze made it seem as if he wanted to skin the gods alive. "I get the feeling you have a story with the god race. Do you want to tell me? Why would the great Pilar tell a low-level creature like you about such things?" snorted Pilar. Yizichen raised his hand, and Pilar hurriedly covered the back of his head. His expression was as comical as it could be. Yizichen laughed, then lowered his hand. "All right then. A low-level creature like me shouldn't provoke the great Mr. Devil. At least you know what's good for you." Pilar forced himself to snort coldly, but he'd forgotten how he'd reacted to Yizichen, a low-level creature, with just a wave of his hand. "Hey!" After a long moment of silence, Pilar suddenly waved at Yizichen. Yizichen glanced at him, then saw Pilar licking his lips and muttering to himself, as if he found it difficult to speak. "Do you have any food for the great devil?" "What?" Yizichen froze. Although Pilar's voice was soft, Yizichen heard him clearly. Yizichen was astonished that Pilar actually needed to eat. In truth, Yizichen truly believed that this guy was a demon. To the outside world, demons were the symbol of evil. Only a true demon like him, or a half-baked demon who was working hard to become one, would talk about them all the time. He was rather surprised that a dignified demon could actually eat food. Pilar's face flushed red, but he gnashed his teeth and glared at Yizichen viciously. "The great Pilar wants some food from you. Don't worry, the great Pilar will definitely make it up to you in the future. We're already so familiar with each other, so there's no need to keep putting on airs. No matter what you say, in my heart, you're just a dwarf, aren't you?" Yizichen sighed and laughed. "How about this? Let's call each other the same. You call me Big Bro, and I'll call you Little Bro, and I'll give you food." "The great Pilar can't accept such an insult." "Then you can just go hungry." With that, Yizichen pulled a few slices of ham and bread from his spatial ring. In truth, he wasn't hungry at all. He'd only done this in order to entice the dwarf. The instant the food appeared, Pilar's mouth watered like a tidal wave. "All right, the great Pilar agrees to your request." "Hey, that won't do. Do you remember what I said just now?" Yizichen laughed. Of course Pilar remembered. But calling a human from the lower realms Big Bro, he really... "Big Bro, please give your little brother some food." Pilar raised his hands above his head, his eyes filled with sincerity and entreaty. Yizichen smiled, then tossed the bread and ham at him. It was obvious that Pilar was starving. He devoured the bread and 2 slices of ham in no time. You humans really know how to enjoy life. Chapter 17:26. Pilar's blissful smile gradually faded from his face. He stopped sucking on the cream on his fingers. Even as he neared the fire, he retreated half a meter. When he looked at Yizichen, his eyes brimmed with undisguised vigilance. As expected, something was wrong. When he saw this, Yizichen was even more certain of his suspicions. They'd only met by chance, and they'd never had a deep conversation. There was no way Pilar was drooling over Yizichen's food. That was why he'd asked Yizichen for food. He really was hungry. Ordinary cultivators, even spiritual bodies, could abstain from eating. Pilar was a dwarf. Although he was unbearably ugly, he couldn't deny the fact that he was a cultivator. Yizichen didn't dare say he was an emperor, but he was at least a supreme. For someone at that level to need to eat was too laughable. Yizichen thought back to when he'd just woken up. His kick had landed squarely on Pilar's body. Yizichen hadn't sensed any divine power obstructing his kick. Pilar hadn't released any divine power during his fall, either. There was only one possibility. He didn't have any divine power at all. All he had was a strong body. Judging from Pilar's state, he was clearly on high alert. Even if Yizichen asked, he wouldn't tell him anything about himself. Yizichen chuckled, then decided not to pursue the matter. He took some meat out of his spatial ring, built a rack in front of the fire, and roasted some meat. His understanding of the Tao of the 5 elements had not only strengthened Yizichen's elemental attacks, but it had also improved his control over fire. He controlled the flames and cooked the meat until it was golden brown. Juices dripped from the meat onto the fire, creating a melodious sound. He sprinkled seasoning, and a gentle breeze blew through the hallway, bringing the meat's fragrance to Pilar's nose. When Pilar smelled the roasted meat, his expression changed visibly, and he gulped. Yizichen could see it all clearly. Yizichen smiled, tore open the meat, and tossed it into his mouth. "Hey!" When he saw this, Pilar finally couldn't help but shout at Yizichen. Yizichen deliberately covered his mouth with grease, then secretly manipulated the breeze to send the fragrance to Pilar. "What is it?" Yizichen pretended not to know. What are you eating?" Pilar pointed at the roasted meat on the grill, and when his eyes fell on it, he couldn't take his eyes off it. "Barbecued meat. Do you want some? It tastes pretty good." As soon as he finished, Pilar's stomach started growling. Yizichen simply smiled, then used his divine power to drag a piece of roasted meat over to Pilar. He had long been tempted by the roast meat, or maybe the butter bread from before was not enough to satisfy his hunger. Without the slightest hesitation, Pilar stuffed the roasted meat into his mouth, without caring about how hot it was. At that moment, Yizichen stopped eating. Instead, he focused on serving Pilar. Whenever Pilar ran out of meat, Yizichen would bring him another piece. That was Yizichen's plan. If he wanted to lower someone's guard, eating good food was one of the simplest and most direct methods. He wanted to use this method to get Pilar to lower his guard and tell him everything he'd experienced. Of course, it would be even better if Pilar told him himself. This absolutely wasn't a waste of time. At least, from Yizichen's point of view, this was absolutely useful information. The evil demon race, a high-level race, seemed to have some connections with the god race. Yizichen couldn't help but marvel at Pilar's appetite. Pilar was only around 1.3 meters tall, but he'd eaten nearly 10 kilograms of beef, yet that hadn't even filled his seemingly bottomless stomach. But that made sense. A powerful body naturally required a large appetite to satisfy its consumption. Pilar had no divine power at all, yet he'd been able to withstand Yizichen's kick. Another few chunks of beef entered his stomach. "That's enough. I'm full." Pilar patted his round belly. Only now did he truly smile in satisfaction. Yizichen stopped. He put away the grill and seasoning, then sat in front of the fire in silence. "Hey!" Pilar lay lazily in front of the fire and smiled inexplicably. He looked at Yizichen with his large eyes, and the corners of his oily lips curled up into a smile. "You're very smart." Without waiting for Yizichen's response, he wiped his mouth and licked his fingers. "You know I'm wary of you, so you won't say a word about what happened before. Instead, you're tempting me with food. That's not a bad idea, but—" Bang! Before Pilar could finish, Yizichen slapped him hard on the back of the head. This slap almost stunned Pilar. He stared with his eyes wide open, unable to say a word for a long time. "Don't think too highly of yourself, kid. You're my little bro, and as your big brother, I can't bear to see my little bro suffer. I saw you weren't full, so I intentionally made you some more food. Don't put on airs. You need to be clear about who's the big brother and who's the little bro, said Yizichin. Pilar glared at him. That's how it is. Pilar is here to thank you. This time, Pilar wasn't angry. He rubbed the back of his head, which hurt a little, then bowed deeply to Yizichin, a smile tugging at his lips. You're the Emperor Star of the Third Era, aren't you? So you know that, joked Yizichin. What do you think? Being the Emperor Star's little bro isn't bad, is it? Of course. Pilar nodded. Those who can enter the time corridor are those who have transcended fate or the brilliance of the Emperor Star. You've made it here twice. Only the Emperor Star has such a heaven-defying fate. Transcended fate and the light of the Emperor Star. Suddenly, Yizichin's expression darkened. If I remember correctly, Zhou Wu came here before. Doesn't that mean he's fated to transcend? Zhou Wu? There's no point in telling me this. I've never remembered the names of those who come here. Pilar lazily lay back down in front of the fire. His words betrayed his arrogance. Yizichin ignored him. He just wanted to get one thing straight. Chapter 1727. Who was telling the truth? Yizichin vaguely recalled someone once telling him that Zhou Wu wasn't fated to transcend. Ever since then, he had always believed in this. Even though he could not remember who had told him this, the conviction in his heart also reflected the person who had told him this, and he had absolute trust in him. Countless emperors entered the Transcendence Mausoleum. Zhou Wu was the only one who couldn't take even half a step inside. Pilar, on the other hand, said that entering the time corridor meant he had transcended. Of course, when Pilar said he'd entered the time corridor, it meant he had either transcended or had celestial fate. Yizichin heard him clearly. The reason he'd concluded Zhou Wu was fated to transcend was because, before entering the time corridor, he didn't have celestial fate. When Yizichin first entered the time corridor, he'd seen the image of the bonfire. He still remembered it clearly. Zhou Wu had traded his heart for the 5 elements' great emperor's celestial fate. Are you sure? Since Yizichin had complete faith in the man who'd told him Zhou Wu hadn't transcended fate, Pilar, who had a completely different theory, wasn't worth trusting. Between the two of them, Yizichin naturally had to suspect Pilar. Suspicion appeared in Yizichin's eyes and didn't fade. Pilar, who'd maintained his arrogant expression, lifted his chin and noticed Yizichin's suspicion. It was like gunpowder had been ignited, and it exploded with a bang. What's with that look? Don't tell me you doubt my words? What right do you have to look at me like that? Do you think I'm lying to you? Pilar directly asked 3 questions in a row, not giving Yizichin a chance to interject. After the first 3 questions, he went back to his own business. Your suspicion is the greatest insult to me. You can insult me, but you can't insult the great time corridor. This time corridor was built by our demon king. Those who are not of the demon race must have transcended fate or emperor's celestial providence. This is the law left behind by the great demon king. You dare doubt the great demon king? I'll fight you to the death. Bang! Pilar swung his arms and lunged at Yizichin, but before he could take more than a few steps, he was kicked several meters away. When he landed on the ground, he didn't hesitate at all. He immediately flipped over and jumped up, then swung his fist towards Yizichin. This time, Yizichin didn't kick and punch him. Instead, he reached out and placed a hand on Pilar's head. Yizichin, who'd used his divine power, made it impossible for Pilar to take even half a step forward. Pilar's height and arm length were so different that all he could do was swing his fists in place. He couldn't even touch the hem of Yizichin's clothes. Calm down. I have no intention of doubting your great devil king. But you doubted me just now. That's the same as doubting the great devil king. Pilar said. Why do you say that? Since that's the great devil king, what right do you have to replace him? Don't you think that's the real disrespect to the devil king? What do you mean replace him? I'm this generation's Devil King, the great Lord Pilar. So that's how it is. When he heard Pilar's words, Yi Zichen didn't seem surprised in the slightest. Instead, it was as if he'd learned exactly what Pilar wanted to hear. He removed his hand from Pilar's head and took a few steps back. I sincerely apologize for my earlier slip of the tongue. Yes, the great Devil King, Mr. Pilar. After the destruction of the First Era, Yi Zichen had taken in quite a few of its experts. Not only had they brought with them the 10th Divine Mountain, but they'd also brought all sorts of resources, including quite a few ancient tomes. One of them, written in human language, had once mentioned Pilar, which meant Great Devil. Just now, Yi Zichen suddenly recalled this, which led to the rest of their conversation. The ugly shorty before him was the current king of the demon race, as well as the greatest devil king of the demon race. In the demon race, a devil king wasn't just a high level of cultivation. It was a form of address, but also a symbol of status. Every generation of the Fiend clan would have a Fiend king. When this Fiend king died, the Fiend clan would give birth to a new Fiend king. This Fiend king would be protected by the entire Fiend clan, given time and resources to grow until he could stand on his own. This was all because of the first Devil King's words: only a Devil King could lead the demon race into a prosperous future. From then on, the demon race regarded this as a motto. At the end of the day, the demon race was a superior race, just like the gods of the outside. Even in the ancient tomes of the First Era, when they'd transcended, there were only a few brief mentions of the demon race. It was very shallow. Yi Zichen had no direct understanding of the demon race's cultivation. However, he clearly remembered that, as soon as a demon was born, they were all divine generals. They could become emperors at a young age, then choose to become either a demon or a warlock. There were many paths for the demon race to choose from. This was similar to the gods of the outside. They were born as trainee gods, then became lesser gods at a young age. After that, they could choose to become angels, knights, or strengthen their godheads to become overgod. It was clear that a superior race was superior. From the moment their clansmen were born, it was clear how different humans were from them. For gods, Yao, and demons, their only path was to become cultivators and transcend step by step. The demons and gods of the outside, on the other hand, could choose any path they wanted. Once they found the most suitable path, they could consider their future development. Pilar was this generation's Devil King. Countless demons had placed their hopes on him, and they'd done everything in their power to pave the way for him. Based on his powerful body, it was clear that the demons had spent far too much money on him. But as the Devil King, he'd been abandoned in the passage of time, all alone and destitute. There wasn't a single guard in sight, and he couldn't sense any of his demonic energy. Yi Zichen refused to believe he hadn't experienced some sort of disaster. "You're trying to trick me." Pilar's gaze darkened. "You knew all along that I was the Devil King. You know about the demons, and you're a god of the outside." When he mentioned the gods, Pilar's eyes flashed with scarlet. Although he didn't have any demonic energy, he still radiated the aura of a Devil King. Chapter 1728. Yi Zichen's smile faded and he took a few steps back. He'd done enough testing. Now that he knew Pilar was the Demon King, Yi Zichen had achieved his goal. What he needed to do now was dispel Pilar's apprehensions and make him truly lower his guard. "Oh, mighty Demon King, I absolutely had no intention of prying into your secrets." Yi Zichen intentionally referred to Pilar as the Demon King, raising his status. His lips curved into a refreshing smile. "If you can calm down and think about it, you'll realize that you were the one who revealed the Demon King's identity in the heat of the moment. It had nothing to do with me. If that's the case, how can you say I tried to trick you into revealing the truth? Eloquence is an innate gift you humans possess." Pilar's gaze was deep, but he still didn't look friendly when he looked at Yi Zichen. "You can say that." Yizichin had no desire to defend himself against Pilar's slander. The way he saw it, this wasn't the time for excuses. All he'd done was probe Pilar a few times, and he'd gotten Pilar to reveal some shocking truths. Although Yizichin had dug a few holes in Pilar's words, none of them were fatal. Pilar knew this as well. Besides, even if he was truly angry, he had no demonic power at all. All he had was his physical body. There was no way he could do anything to Yizichin. It could be said that even if Pilar was angry, from the moment Yizichin entered the time corridor, Yizichin was already in control of the situation. Yizichin wouldn't put himself on a pedestal just because he was stronger than Pilar. Even if Yizichin really wanted to, given Pilar's dignity as the Demon King, he'd rather die than become someone's prisoner. He wanted a win-win situation, not a slave. "Oh mighty Demon King, you really don't need to do this. I'm sure you know that our third era is in the middle of a whirlpool of trouble," said Yizichin. "Did the Outer Realm God race attack you?" Pilar asked calmly. "See? You really do know." Yizichin laughed, but his gaze instantly sharpened. "The outsiders haven't attacked us yet, but they've already begun probing us. Not long ago, I sent out a few advance squads, but they were attacked by origin-shattering beasts. He survived. Only one video was sent to us by one of the members using a secret technique." "Video?" Pilar was stunned. The term was new to him. "It's just an image." Yizichin gave a brief explanation, then brought the conversation back on track. "A full 100. I've never had so many subordinates die in Chaos City. These are all my elite subordinate. Their deaths can be described by others as sacrificial sacrifices. Yes, he's a hero, but not with me." "What do you mean?" Pilar seemed interested. "I will avenge them." Yizichin's voice was sonorous and forceful. From the aura emanating from his body, it was clear that he'd spoken from the bottom of his heart. Revenge. The moment Yizichin saw the video, he already had that thought in mind. It didn't matter how emotional the general had been, or how Su Lu had coldly attacked him. None of this could elevate or diminish the status of the advance party in Yizichin's heart. They had indeed died for the sake of the Third Era. There was nothing wrong with that. If they hadn't gone to the outside for the sake of the Third Era, they wouldn't have been ambushed by the aura-breaking beast. It was only natural to treat their families well, but they couldn't just sacrifice themselves for nothing. In that case, all Yizichin could do for them was avenge them. Only the blood of the outsiders and the corpses of the aura-breaking beasts could be used as a sacrifice to their souls. He silently looked at Yizichin's solemn expression, but before long, it disappeared and was replaced with a relaxed smile. Pilar could tell that he wasn't really smiling. He was just hiding his solemn expression. "Hey, I might have said a bit too much," laughed Yizichin. "It's fine. I don't particularly mind." Pilar smiled kindly. Suddenly, Yizichin reached his hand out. Pilar was baffled. He didn't understand why Yizichin would do something like this. "In truth, I've said so much because I wanted to tell you, Lord Pilar. The outsiders are the Third Era's enemies, and they're also my enemies. In that case, how about Lord Pilar work together with the Third Era?" Pilar furrowed his brows. Yizichin pressed his lips into a smile. "If I'm not mistaken, the reason you ended up in this situation, hiding your identity in the time corridor, is inextricably linked to the outsiders. In that case, why can't we work together? There are mutual enemies, aren't they?" Hiding his identity. Pilar had to admit that the human race's vocabulary was vast and profound. It was just the right word for him. The Demon King was Pilar's true identity, one he'd always carefully concealed. While he'd hidden it, it was also the heaviest pain in his heart. The Demon King hadn't just brought him glory, respect, and the attention of millions. It had also placed a heavy responsibility on his shoulders. He'd received his race's protection, and in the future, he'd appeared when his race was in danger. He'd ensured that the demons lived on forever. However, the current situation proved that He'd failed. It was fair to say that he'd utterly failed. He'd failed to shoulder the responsibility of protecting his race, and even in the final moments, his race had done everything in their power to protect him. In the end, they'd left him in the time corridor. Work together? For some reason, Pilar inexplicably recalled something Yi Zichen had said, even if it didn't really fit the current situation. As your big brother, I can't bear to see my little brother suffer. Yi Zichen had said this to Pilar, but in this situation, all he'd said was to emphasize his words a bit more. His subordinates had sacrificed themselves for the new era. There was nothing he could do for them. All he could do was avenge them. This was a sign of their sense of responsibility. Although Yi Zichen said they were elites, they were absolutely true elite. They'd been sent to the outside to investigate the god race. As the Demon King, he was well versed in the management of his faction. Scouting missions like this couldn't be left to the higher-up. Only the true elites of the clan would go. Most of the people sent to such dangerous places were expendable, insignificant characters. Even if they really died, there wouldn't be any changes in the clan because of this. To them, it didn't matter at all. If they could bring back some information, that was good, but if they couldn't, then so be it. For the sake of the clan, and more importantly, for the sake of the new era, like Yi Zichen, their sacrifices were inevitable. Chapter 1729. The time corridor's bonfire blazed brighter and brighter. The fiery red light illuminated the faces of Yi Zichen and Pilar, who stood before the bonfire, and their faces reddened. Yi Zichen's hand remained suspended in midair. Pilar didn't respond. However, he could tell that the Demon King was hesitant, so he wasn't in a hurry. He quietly retracted his hand and waited for Pilar to make a decision. In truth, Pilar wasn't hiding his emotions. He really was hesitating. From the moment Yi Zichen entered the time corridor and Pilar decided to meet him, he'd wanted to work with Yi Zichen. His hatred for the outsiders was far deeper than Yi Zichen's. Pilar was keenly aware of his current situation. Overthrowing a colossus like the god race was nothing more than a pipe dream. He needed external help. As the Third Era's Emperor Star, Yi Zichen had the fortune to enter the time corridor twice. To him, Yi Zichen was the perfect partner. He didn't directly agree because he didn't want to show how desperate he was. He also wanted to understand Yi Zichen a little better. After all, they'd only met twice, and the first time they met, Yi Zichen hadn't given him a particularly good impression. He'd stolen the demon race's prized possession, the Devil Dharma body. Just now, Yi Zichen's display of his true feelings had moved Pilar somewhat, but only slightly. Right now, he needed to understand Yi Zichen in many ways. At the very least, he needed a shallow understanding of his character. Pilar was already standing at the edge of a cliff. He had no way out, and he couldn't afford to fail. Pilar took a deep breath, then glanced at Yi Zichen. We can consider working together, but right now, cooperation isn't the problem we need to solve the most. Getting out of here is our top priority. I won't hide it from you. I trust you've sensed it too. I don't have any demonic energy on me. I'm only protected by the time corridor, but I can no longer control it. Honesty was a good thing. Pilar's words didn't seem like a good thing at the moment. Without demonic energy, he couldn't control the time corridor, and there was no way he could leave the time corridor through the dimensional rift. Even so, he didn't have any demonic energy. It was a secret, but Pilar still said it. His honesty meant that he was gradually dropping his guard against Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen merely smiled at the question of how to leave the subdimension. Suddenly, the bonfire in the corridor burned brighter and brighter. The flames were like countless fiery snakes, threatening to swallow them whole. At this moment, a loud cry came from the bonfire. The flames of the bonfire splashed around them, and at the same time, a blazing bird appeared in their field of vision. The scorching heat wave baked the time corridor into a fiery red iron plate. Pilar, who was sitting on the ground, suddenly had a feeling, It was as if he had become the delicious barbecue Yi Zichen had given him. However, the heat didn't last long. Pilar saw Yi Zichen place a barrier around him. "You really are courting death." The fierce bird on the bonfire spat out a mantra. The biting coldness in his mouth formed a strong contrast with his heat. "This isn't your summoned creature?" The bird's words stunned Pilar. He and Yi Zichen were the only ones in the time corridor. Pilar was certain of this. Without demonic energy, he couldn't even control the time corridor, much less summon a creature. Only Yi Zichen could. But why did this bird seem to have such a bad temper? Was it because of his fire attribute? Generally speaking, fire attribute creatures had fiery tempers. "You'd better shut up." Before Pilar could respond, Yi Zichen glared at him in exasperation. A summoned creature? In truth, calling the bird a summoned creature wasn't wrong. It was one of the 3 Yao emperors of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. However, couldn't Pilar tell that the bird looked like it wanted to eat Yi Zichen alive? And he dared call it a summoned creature? He really wasn't afraid of death. Back in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, he'd tried to kill his master. Yi Zichen didn't dare provoke him. Summoning him was Qinglan's idea. After entering the time corridor, Yi Zichen had extra divine power to communicate with the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Qinglan had recommended the bird, and she'd convinced it to help. The bird had come out, but it had a terrible temper. When he saw that Yi Zichen's emotions weren't too stable, and the blazing bird looked like it was about to devour him, Pilar considered the fact that he had no demonic energy at all, so he obediently shut his mouth and said no more. "Boss, don't be angry. Uncle Lon said that if I wanted to help you find it, I needed a fire. As you can see, I'm in pretty bad shape right now. I used all my strength to make a bonfire." Yi Zichen smiled apologetically. "I know this bonfire is a bit embarrassing for you, but I had no choice." "Humph!" The fierce bird coldly snorted, and with a shake of its body, it transformed into a handsome man with sharp eyes. "I really don't know what's so good about you, kid." Even Qinglan and Song Xiong, that brainless bastard, spoke up for you. Song Xiong had spoken up too? Yi Zichen made a mental note of this. When he had time, he'd have to properly reward him when he entered the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. However, right now, all he could do was smile apologetically. "I really don't understand why you're the Emperor Star of this era. You don't have the slightest sense of maturity. You're just like a street kid," slandered the bird mercilessly. Pilar, who was inside the barrier, widened his eyes at the scene before him. This bird was supposed to be Yi Zichen's summoned creature, right? Why did it feel like he was the master? If this were the demons, their masters would have killed this summoned creature long ago. Yi Zichen really had a good temper. This sort of partner. Bonus points. Yi Zichen had no idea that this situation would actually earn him extra points in Pilar's heart. All he could think about now was, "I have to endure." Yi Zichen stood in front of the bonfire. He couldn't help but remind himself that if he wanted to get out of here, he'd have to rely on this guy Qinglan had recommended. It really was strange. The Yao emperors of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda were each worse than the last. Song Xiong had gone to great lengths to convince Yi Zichen to give him peach juice, but this bird's temper was even worse than his. He really wasn't easy to get along with. Even so, he still had to force a smile on his face and attach himself to her. Chapter 1730. Raging flames burned the heavens. Within the pitch-black vault of the dimensional space where the spatial storm was raging, all that was reflected in his eyes was a sea of blood red. Yi Zichen and Pilar hadn't stayed in the time corridor. Instead, they'd followed the bird into the storm. Only now, when Yi Zichen saw the fiery sky, did he truly see what pure fire was. There were no impurities whatsoever. Everything he saw was scarlet. Even Yi Zichen, who'd cultivated the Tao of the 5 elements to the pinnacle of fire, couldn't compare. The raging waves of heat forced the spatial storm out of the way of the spatial storm. Wherever the flames reached, there was practically nothing left of it. Roar! All of a sudden, the flaming bird that had transformed into a human body in the void suddenly let out a strange cry. Soon after, with him as the center, the surroundings of his body abruptly burned with scorching but pure white flames. Next, he stomped into the air, and a red lotus of fire appeared beneath his feet. The fiery lotus carried him forward and turned the area where his flame was burning into a vacuum space, completely blocking the space storm and the fault turbulence. What's he doing? Yizichin couldn't help but mutter to himself as he watched the blazing bird charge forward. Yizichin had asked him to come here in order to break through the spatial fault and find the exit. However, judging from his expression, he had no intention of looking for a way out. Rather, he wanted to use the most direct method, use his flames to burn a path out. This showed that he was supremely confident in his own strength. Yizichin just didn't know if this confidence was just a form of arrogance. Pilar had been paying close attention to the bird's movements. He had no choice but to do so. Whether or not they could leave this spatial fault was closely related to him. Yizichin's whisper naturally reached his ears, but before he could say anything, his eyes widened. Even for a demon king like him, this sort of terror was enough to make him lose his composure. "Hey, your friend over there, did he go to the wrong place?" As Pilar panicked, Yizichin, who'd been paying close attention to the bird, naturally saw where he'd gone. There was a huge black hole right in front of him. Its powerful suction force seemed to want to swallow everything around it into its black hole. Yizichin had a rather clear impression of the black hole. He'd seen it before when he'd first entered the subdimension. The reason why Yizichin cared so much about it was because it was the largest black hole he'd ever seen. If he remembered correctly, when he saw this black hole, there were many smaller black holes around it. But at this moment, those small black holes had long since disappeared. If there were no accidents, they should have been swallowed by this huge black hole. Suddenly, Yizichin saw that there really were a few smaller black holes around the giant one. They were struggling to hold on as the giant one swallowed them whole. This further confirmed Yizichin's suspicions. It had devoured the black hole. Black hole swallowing black hole. One had to know that a single black hole was a huge threat to explorers. Even if it was the smallest black hole, an Imperial Realm expert would have to be careful and avoid it. They wouldn't dare to fight it. Even monarchs and emperors wouldn't dare to approach this enormous black hole that could swallow other small and medium-sized black holes. But this bird. Suddenly, Yizichin recalled that, as soon as he'd entered the 4th floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, the bird had tried to kill him. Fortunately, Qinglan had intervened and stabilized the situation. This wasn't the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, and Qinglan wasn't by his side. Could it be that he wanted to? "You're crazy, but we won't go crazy with you. Pilar, let's go." Yizichin was about to turn around and head back the way they'd come, but to his surprise, Pilar stopped. "We can't go back. The passage collapsed long ago." Yizichin looked ahead. Sure enough, without the bird's flames, the passage had long since collapsed. Spatial storms had taken over the surrounding space. In truth, Yizichin could endure this sort of storm. Before entering the time corridor, he'd endured it bit by bit. However, now there was Pilar. He didn't have any demonic power. To put it nicely, he had a strong body, but to put it bluntly, he was half crippled. Yizichin had to expend a great deal of effort just to pass through. If he brought Pilar along, "I really have to give it to you." Yizichin sighed resentfully. Retreating was out of the question. Even if he could leave, he couldn't just leave Pilar behind. He had no choice but to bite the bullet and follow the bird forward. He watched as Pilar and Yizichin drew closer and closer to the black hole. "Damn it, there's no enmity between us. There's no enmity between us, so why are you making things so difficult for me?" The black hole drew closer and closer. Even Yizichin and company, who were standing in the vacuum of the flames, could feel the black hole's powerful suction force. Flamingo continued to walk at the very front, using his pure flames to fight against the suction force of the black hole. At that moment, Flamingo turned around in response to Yizichen's earlier words. "Did I tell you to follow me?" snorted Flamingo. "No, don't say that. Since you promised Uncle Lon and the others, you should take me out of here. No matter what you think of me or what grievances you have, we can settle them once we're out of here. What's the point of sulking?" "Sulking?" laughed Flamingo. "You really think too highly of yourself. If this isn't sulking, then what is? There's such a massive black hole up ahead. Can't you see it? If you're afraid, then just go back." As soon as it finished speaking, Flamingo charged towards the black hole without even turning its head back. Yizichin clenched his fists, gnashed his teeth, and said nothing. Pilar spoke up as well. "Trust him. Trust him." No matter who saw it, Flamingo's actions were suicidal. Such a massive black hole could swallow up even a small one. If they went in, they wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between its teeth. But given the current situation, they had no choice but to try their luck. They couldn't retreat. All they could hope for was that Flamingo wasn't suicidal. He really did have a way to break through the black hole. However, the chances of that happening were minuscule. Whoosh! Just as Yizichin was starting to get worried, a wave of scorching flames completely cancelled out the black hole's suction and spatial storms. Their field of vision was filled with a dazzling fiery red. Pilar froze, and so did Yizichin, because in front of them they saw a dazzling sun. Chapter 1731. The desolate wilderness was covered in white as far as the eye could see. It was obvious that this was a snowy mountain. Bright sunlight shone on the snow, causing the ice and snow to sparkle. Yizichin stood in the snow. His black robes were especially eye-catching in the pure white. His expression wasn't too good. He looked to the north with a dark expression. How lucky! They'd emerged from the subdimension rift, but the unruly three-legged golden crow didn't give him a good look. It really is. Yizichin looked in the direction the three-legged crow had left. The crow had transformed into a blazing sun and burned away the black hole, opening up a spatial passageway. Yizichin's heart was filled with the joy of surviving a calamity, as well as gratitude. He'd wanted to thank him properly once he'd emerged, but he hadn't expected the crow to scowl at him, as if someone had stolen his treasure. Yizichin asked himself if he'd ever offended the crow. He really couldn't understand why this guy was so hostile towards him. Fortunately, the three-legged golden crow was rational and hadn't attacked him. It was just verbal mockery, and nothing else was out of line. But even though Yizichin resented the three-legged golden crow, he still remembered this favor. When the opportunity presented itself, he'd definitely repay it. At his level, it was impossible for him to return a favor with ordinary small favors. How exactly was he supposed to repay this life-saving favor? Bluebears liked peach juice. Yizichin wondered if the three-legged golden crow would be interested in such delicacies. What he was more concerned about was its true form. The three-legged golden crow. In the legends of the modern realm, Ho-E once shot down 9 suns, leaving only one, the current sun. The modern realm, which revered science, already knew that the sun was a fixed star. The three-legged golden crow was just a myth. However, Yizichin had come into contact with a former deity, seen the great sage wreak havoc in the heavenly court, befriended the heavenly court's war god Yang Jian, and interacted with the Queen Mother and the Jade Emperor. He'd also learned that the love story between the Supreme Treasure and Fairy Zixia really did exist. This time, the three-legged golden crow had transformed into a sun. Was it possible that the sun the world believed to be a fixed star really was a three-legged golden crow? Yizichin smiled and shook his head. He didn't dwell on the matter any longer. He had encountered too many strange things. Even if the sun was really a three-legged golden crow, it was nothing for him to make a fuss about. Moreover, he still had to seek revenge from Gu Xuanda. Even if Gu Xuanda had not thrown him into the dimensional rift, he would not have met Pilar. He couldn't bring this guy out of the time corridor either. But that was a completely different matter. He had been thrown into the dimensional spatial crack, almost causing him to die in the spatial storm. No matter what, he would not let this grudge go. Even if he couldn't defeat him, he still had to demand an explanation from him. How is it? How does it feel to be in the God Race's territory? Yi Zichen glanced to the side. In the end, the great demon king left the subdimension with Yi Zichen. At that moment, Pilar was just a few meters away from Yi Zichen. He looked around at the pure white snow, his eyes flashing with surprise, as if he'd never seen snow before. God Race. Pilar was taken aback for a moment, but he quickly understood. You humans really think too highly of yourselves. You're just an ordinary, low-level race, yet you call yourself a God Race. I don't care what you say. In any case, everyone here calls this place the God Race. Yi Zichen ignored Pilar's slander and chuckled. Furthermore, Pilar's words weren't directed at him. He was merely stating a fact. There was no need for Yi Zichen to argue with him. Is this your territory? Asked Pilar. Of course not. Yi Zichen looked around, then extended his divine sense outwards. If his guess was right, this was the divine mountain under the Jade Lake Palace head's control. However, it was very close to the central divine mountain. It was just as the divine arbiter had said. From here, he could clearly see that the central divine mountain was surrounded by a blood-colored barrier. Divine sense couldn't reach inside, and the mountain was completely isolated from the outside world. Yi Zichen had no way of knowing what Zhou Zhouwu was doing inside. However, Yi Zichen sensed something unusual about the blood-colored barrier. There's something special about this barrier. Pilar spoke up as well. Clearly, she had also noticed the bloody orb of the central divine mountain. Of course. The God Emperor lives there. The God Emperor? Are you not? You're the Lord of the Emperor's Star. If nothing out of the ordinary happens, you should be the leader of the human race. Why do you say that? Isn't it only natural? Pilar felt that Yi Zichen was absolutely right. Perhaps it was because he was the demon king that he had such thoughts. In his inherited memories, the Lord of the Emperor's Star's status was similar to his status as the demon king. He was an existence capable of leading the human race to prosperity. The Emperor's Star should be the God Emperor of the God Race. Unfortunately, this was a special time. The ambitious Zhou Wu wasn't the kind of wise ruler who could abdicate his throne. Who knew? Zhou Wu might even be researching how to steal Yi Zichen's starlight and celestial fate. Let's not talk about this anymore. Yi Zichen couldn't be bothered to argue. He waved his hand and dropped the subject. At this point in time, it was no longer important who would take the position of God Emperor. Besides, there was already a clear difference between the two of them. The righteous and the unrighteous. The righteous received much support, while the unrighteous received little. That was the case between Yi Zichen and Zhou Wu. Practically all of the God Race's emperors were on good terms with Yi Zichen. As for Zhou Wu, he had practically no trusted aides he could use. In these special times, he wasn't thinking about how to defend against foreign enemies. Rather, he'd sealed up the divine mountains and was busy with who knew what. To tell the truth, Zhou Wu wasn't much of a threat to Yi Zichen. He wasn't much of a threat anymore. However, the central divine mountain's current situation was strange. He still had to be on guard. Once he returned to the 10th divine mountain, he'd have to send some people to keep an eye on the central divine mountain. Pilar could tell that Yi Zichen didn't want to discuss this any further, so he didn't say anything else. However, I didn't think you'd really leave the time corridor. It seems you're coming back with me? Pilar's concession allowed Yi Zichen to shift the topic back to him. However, he didn't resist too much. From the moment he left the time corridor, he'd already made up his mind. What? Asked Pilar. If that's the case, shouldn't we be more honest with each other?